Okay, woo, that's quiet. So, hello everyone, welcome back from after lunch. We are going to be presenting now the marvelous Mallika Sarabhai. Woo! Hand of applause, everyone. In free fall experiments with life. Now, what can one say to describe Mallika Sarabhai? Well, she's a dancer, an actor, a theatre person, but I love that her Wikipedia page forefronts that she's an activist. When I met her in Bangalore with her performance around street children quite some years ago, and they're amazing stories. They were amazing stories, all performed in dance. A young man whose story had been told as part of the performance appeared to meet Mallika and say he was that boy. He was that boy whose story had been told, and now he was an independent, successful person. It was really extremely moving. And so, activism has consequence. Activism has impact. It's not one doesn't just do things because one is being aggressive about something. One does things to make change. And this is a festival. The climate of change is what we're addressing. And so today, Mallika is here to speak about her memoir, her documentation of her experiment with life, and it's told with humor and earthy wisdom. And she talks about coming to terms with herself, with her body, with finding a lifestyle that works for her, for one. And in conversation with her is the laser-sharp, witty, smart Malavika Sangvi. I'm sure it's going to be a marvelous session. May I invite the conversationist on stage.
Hello, checking, checking. It's on. Everybody can hear. Mallika, you want to check your mic?
Do I have a separate
mic?
Oh,
yes. Hello. So, Mallika, what an extraordinary book I've read, not once but twice now. And all my friends there, Sheila, Nina, they've all gone and bought it because they're so interested after I told them what the book was about. Now, when we think of Mallika Sarabhai, we think of this strong, courageous, polymath, this almost Renaissance woman who dances, who's an activist, who has run a dance company, she's a mother. But this book, I want to tell all of you, is first of all straight from the heart. And of course, Mallika we think of as this person who comes from a legacy of science and art and dance and all the things that make life wonderful and worth living. So I thought I was going to read a book about all of that. But this book is about Mallika bearing her soul and talking about her vulnerabilities, her challenges, the difficulties she's been through, and it makes you so human. So was that the intention? I mean, because you're very formidable from the outside, but now you're like us, like the rest of us. So tell us how and why this book came about.
Thank you. I have to say that having been a publisher for 35 years, it feels very odd to be on the writer's side of the table. And it's new to me. You are my first lit festival where I'm not performing and I'm not there pushing a book of mine that I've published, but here as a writer. So thank you for being my first audience. You know, Malvika, for years, people have been saying to me, where do you get your energy from? How is it that you look the way you do? You don't change. What do you eat? What is your regime? And so on. So when COVID happened, I was certainly in isolation with peacocks and mongoose and dogs and monkeys.
In Ahmedabad.
In Ahmedabad, in Darpana, in a very fabulous campus, I have to say. And I thought, maybe this is the time to actually sit down to write it. So it started off as a book about health and wellness. And then so much of what I have experimented came out of difficulties in life that I couldn't separate the two. I had to talk about why I reached a point where I was looking for an alternate lifestyle, an alternate cure, an alternate way of mental well-being. And so I just wrote it, and I don't think I was thinking style, or I was thinking vocabulary, or any of those things. I just wrote it.
What struck me is how helpful it is. It's not just telling people, readers, what you've done, but actually giving them links and names of different, for instance, chakras, different multani mittis. I mean, the detail you've gone into is quite extraordinary. It's almost like it's like a compendium for life. And hats off to you. But let's start from the beginning, because the first line of your book is about your relationship with food. And food is something that is universal to all of us. So tell us about this whole journey you had, 30-year journey with bulimia. Please.
It wasn't named then.
Yes. And I would never have believed that of you. But please, let's start from there.
Well, I came from a foodie father and a mother who couldn't care less about what she ate. And as many of you know, my mother came from Tamil Nadu and Kerala, a family which was so non-vegetarian that her mother used to say to her that for your sins you are going to marry a vegetarian. Not only did she marry a vegetarian, but he happened to be in Ahmedabad, a very giant city. And my mother used to talk about how when she first married, every time they were out with Papa's sisters, the sisters would point to a goat and say, "Do you feel like eating it?" And she said she was just so disgusted with this attitude. But so Amma started missing food, and Papa was a foodie, and she started converting meat dishes, European dishes, Mexican dishes, in a time when this was unheard of. Today, we live in a world where everything is accessible and everything is available. But I grew up sort of having cheese souffle when I was 2. But I only liked white food. I liked sugar and potatoes and white butter and ice cream and potatoes. So when I was about 13 and
you were a big child,
I was a plump child. I used to think I was an enormous child, but when I look at the pictures, I'm just chubby fat.
Isn't that strange? Sometimes when we look back at our pictures, we never realized we were so slim and pretty attractive in those days. But what is it about us women that we never really absorb any of that? But we'll come to that a little later.
But I think the book was for those women as well.
Exactly.
So I couldn't go to Amma and ask her, what do you do to stay slim? She was always slim, and she also ate all the wrong things. She ate everything that is banned today, like white rice and white bread and butter and sugar. But Papa was the one who was very, very conscious about what he ate.
And he did yoga.
Yeah, and he ran every morning and drank 4 glasses of water at 4 o'clock in the morning when he got up and so on. So it was to Papa I turned. By this time, my mother had asked me if I wanted to be a dancer or a duck. And I got the point. Tried to start walking with one foot in front of the other. But that's really where the journey began. The journey began with Papa, and Papa talking to me about food and nutrition, and slowly egging me on to eat green things. And even today, I think his Caesar salad was the best Caesar salad I've ever eaten. But slowly pushing me. Unfortunately, between 13 and 17, when I lost him, was not a very long period. But he did teach me enough to start my own hunt off.
And it took you to things like Complan, and I mean,
I have IIM colleagues here who may or may not remember that I spent my entire 2 years in IIM having 1 glass of Complan in the afternoon and 1 orange at night. That was it. That was it. And lots of cigarettes, lots and lots and lots of cigarettes, made possible because we used to be in production meetings and everybody except me smoked. And I had extremely long hair, and the next morning I would stink of cigarettes. And from there, of course, 1 puff here and 1 puff there.
And what age did you start smoking?
18.
Wow. And you were in college with Parveen Babi and Asha Putli, I think.
Asha Putli was much older.
Senior.
Parveen Babi and
Kavita Singh. Yes.
Kavita Bhambani, who then
Yes.
became
Miss India.
and is now Kavita Singh, the interior decorator.
Yes. So you started smoking, and of course you came from a very progressive, liberal household. So there was no shame, or there is a stigma these days with smoking. But in those days,
But it wasn't
at 18,
connected with cancer at all.
No, it wasn't. So you were an open smoker.
Yes, and when I gave up on the press was when the largest selling Gujarati daily, while I was shooting and smoking, said of me in a headline, she doesn't even have the sharam to hide the fact that she is smoking. And I thought, is this what society is about? I want nothing to do with it.
Good.
That was the end of that.
But you managed to kick the habit after how long?
10 years.
10 years. And that was, amazing. So Malika got hypnotized, and she was a very skeptical client of
hypnotea.
Yeah, she was a very skeptical hypnotee. While going through the process, she didn't realize that it would work. And the next day or 3 days later, and since then you've never smoked.
No.
Okay. So that was the one thing.
And I've been trying to find a replacement hypnotist for my friends, but have never found one who literally in 15 minutes got me to kick a habit, not only get me to kick a habit, but I had tried quitting smoking like everybody does before that, and had always put on a lot of weight. And I kicked the habit. He gave me his calling card and said, call me collect from wherever you are in the world if you want to smoke again. And
this was a European
American.
Doctor? American
Very
doctor.
Jewish American doctor.
What did he say to you while he was hypnotizing you? What was the...
No, sir, I had just begun my dance career. Smoking had had no effect on my getting breathless or anything. And he went on saying, imagine that you're running up a hill and that your breath is free and oxygen is filling your lungs. And I'm lying there saying, I run up hills anyway and my lungs are free. I'm not getting out of breath. And then he said, now imagine all the horrible things that happen with oral cancer. And that was pretty horrible. But all the time I was having this conversation with myself saying that, यार तू actress है, बिल्कुल act कर रही है, $200 भी गए और फालतू में cigarette भी गई. But
it worked.
It worked.
Let's talk about the bulimia, because that's a very, very scary, serious ailment to have. And what year did you think, when did you start on it, and how did it peter out?
I was visiting a friend abroad, and we were staying at the home of their friends, and the lady of the house would prepare amazing meals and would eat quite a lot, and then disappear for 10 minutes and come back with freshly applied lipstick. And I continued sort of looking at her quizzically. And then on the third day, she said, Malika, don't you like the food? And I said, I love the food, but I'm so petrified of putting on weight. And she said, oh, you must do what I do. And that's how she introduced me to the act of throwing up after a meal. I tried it while I was there, got a very sore throat, didn't work at all, worked out a system, and then that must have been 1976.
And
then
again, it wasn't part of people's consciousness.
no, it wasn't. It wasn't a disease. I didn't think anybody else did it. So it didn't become bulimia and anorexia. Didn't become till many years
Princess Diana became the poster girl of bulimia.
Yeah, but that was in
much later.
Yeah, it was 80s or something. Yes.
Two hilarious consequences of this very unfortunate ailment is that you wrote in the book that each time you went in to do the job, you couldn't puke without gagging and making horrible sounds. And everybody in the living room would know exactly what she'd done. And then she would come back and join them on the table. And the other thing is that Malika used to edit and publish Inside Outside. And her cousins and brothers who knew about her puking habit called it the Inside Outside treatment.
They still do.
But you don't do that.
No, not for many years. No, it petered out because I was losing so many friends in New York where they would go to great lengths to make a vegetarian delicious meal for me and then look aghast when I came out of the bathroom, and I wouldn't know what to say, and I'd say something got caught in my throat, and it just became too much.
So from there, the book expands almost like an accordion into so many therapies that you have undergone. Now there was pranic healing, there was chakra healing, there is Ayurveda, you tried TM, you tried color therapy, there is, it's called non-violent communication, then you learnt French through training your ear muscles. Tell us about this whole journey and which ones that you found were the most helpful and how you've grown through it.
She makes it sound like a medical journal, doesn't she?
Yeah, it is.
It is. At least I hope it's not. I have been interested in alternate lifestyles, I think, since I was very, very young. Because Amma and Papa
but that he had a science background.
Yes, but he had a science background, but did Surya Namaskars and avoided taking medicines. He also started one of India's then largest pharmaceutical companies.
Yes, but allopathic medicine.
Allopathic,
yes.
But he himself believed in drinking water and hydrating the self and doing Surya Namaskars and doing yoga and all of that. And when I was 11, I had very bad migraines. And none of the doctors could sort that out. My eyesight was fine. And a cloth merchant, cousin of my grandfather, the founder of Calico Mills, was a homeopath as well. And I went to him and he asked me this, what then I thought were very odd questions, like, do you like your food cold or hot? Do you prefer summer or winter? And, you know, that I thought had no relation.
Which side of the bed do you sleep on?
Yes,
they asked
no relation. Do I prefer dogs or cats? That was the other one. And then gave me these sweet pills to eat and my migraine disappeared. So somewhere in the back of my mind was a thing that there is something besides allopathy. And so when I was very young when this whole pituitary thing started. I was diagnosed having a brain tumor at a time when endocrinology was not really a science even.
What year was that?
79, 80.
Okay.
And one had to search for endocrinologists. And Papa had died. We had nobody to turn to. There was a family Mahabharat going on. And the wonderful Jamshed Bhabha, Homi Bhabha's younger brother and the founder of the National Center for Performing Arts, was a very dear friend of my mother's, and he was connected with the Tata Memorial Hospital and called his friends across the world and found the expert endocrinologist in St. Mary's Hospital in London. And so we went to London, and there were no MRIs, there were no CAT scans, For people who have been born since then, it's just unimaginable. But the only thing they could do to actually check out whether it was a tumor was something called a multiplanograph, which is taking 40, 50 X-rays at a hair's distance and then piling them on together and then looking at them to see whether a lateral view could be. And he said to my mother she needs to be operated immediately, and there were discussions about whether they would cut open my forehead or go in from the nose.
And were you doing films by then?
I was doing films by then, and it came up because I would wake up one morning and I looked like a frog. I couldn't get rings off my hands. I couldn't get bangles off my hand. My body was completely out of control. And I thought, this is not me. I would have to cancel film shoots. And to not have control over my body for me was very frightening, very, very frightening. And so we went around looking, and so it was a question of being operated on immediately. And then there was a very nice Hungarian doctor with him who said, listen, tumors don't grow that fast. Just go home if you want to think about it, and just go on checking Mallika's peripheral eyesight, because the minute a brain tumor grows, the peripheral eyesight is the first thing that gets affected. So we went away, and then for 2 years, nothing happened with the peripheral eyesight. But that's really when we started the search for an alternate, because my mother believed in Sai Baba. And there was a gentleman, a very ordinary railway clerk in Ahmedabad, in whom every Thursday a manifestation of Sai Baba would come.
This is Putipurta? I mean, this is which one?
No, this is the original Sai Baba, Shirdi.
Okay.
And I used to go sometimes with Amma, because Amma would go every Thursday. And he would be talking, very ordinary SSC pass kind of person. And then suddenly he would stiffen. And this aroma of red desi roses would fill the whole room. And he would become glassy-eyed. His voice would change completely. And it was obvious that he wasn't acting. And when Amma was first told that I needed a brain surgery, as soon as we got back to Ahmedabad, she first went to him. And he said in Gujarati, weapons will not be used on her, meaning surgery won't happen. So Amma was determined in the time we had been given that she would look at every alternative wherever. And so this search started. And I talk about this search and where it took me. As it happened,
where did it take you? Tell them, because I know, but what were the different stages that you went through while you were under the impression
do I not want to sell any books?
They'll all
I'm
go
not
and buy
going to
them.
tell you. But what was funny was that whether it was one of the therapies I did, whether it was a psychic surgeon, whether it was a bricklayer in whom an 18th century doctor came, whether it was Ayurveda, whether it was faith healing, whether it was prayer, I don't know. But 2.5 years later, when my bloating was still not improving very much, I said to Amma, Amma, I can't live like this. I'm at the beginning of my career. I can't go on like this. I can't go on doing this. So if it's an operation that's needed, let's go and finish with it. So we went back to Professor Victor Wynne, who was furious and said to my mother that it's probably too late to operate. So they took all the multiplanographs again, and he's a very dour person and not a smile ever. And he called, the date of the operation was fixed, and he called Amma and he said, come and see me. And Amma asked me to wait outside and went in, and he said, we cannot operate. And you can imagine a mother's heart sinking that she had given in to this whimsy of her daughters of not being operated immediately. And then he looked up and said, no, that's not what I mean. She doesn't need an operation. And so I became a case study for something called the empty cellar syndrome, which medical research had written about, but in the last 50 years, no one had actually come across an empty cellar syndrome case. So I was in full Bharatanatyam regalia on the cover of Lancet Medical Magazine. And in 1980, when I went to perform at Sadler's Wells in London, 40 of his students and the entire endocrinology department was on the balcony seats, and I could see him gesticulating, saying, "That's the empty cellar, that's the empty cellar," as I danced away.
Lovely story and such a happy ending. So while you were searching for a cure, is this when you underwent psychic surgery?
Yes.
You tell them about psychic surgery. It sounded fascinating. Camellia Punjabi had organized it.
Yeah, Camellia Punjabi of Taj Hotels called me out of the blue. This was before. She knew I was suffering after Papa's death. I had just finished the IM. It was 74. And she called one day and said, "I know you are interested in things like this, but I'm getting a Philippine faith healer who used to be a NASA scientist and has become a faith healer. His mother is a very famous surgeon, psychic surgeon. So would you like to come for a 3-day workshop?"
This is faith healing, not fake healing.
No, this is not fake healing at all. There's a lot of that. But there's a lot of fake allopathic healing as well.
Yes.
So I went off, and it was an extraordinary 3 days. I had not been able to really grieve after Papa died. I went straight into the IIM, and in the IIM, they thought I had been taken on charity. I had a complete nervous breakdown. They thought, "Ye to buddhu ladki hai, Vikram Sarabhai ki beti hai, to le liya fir isme." That didn't help. So I had not really cried, and I was also trying to be very strong for my mother, because I thought Papa would have wanted me to be very strong for my mother, because she was completely devastated. So I had not cried. And I spent these 3 days listening to him and doing meditation and just weeping. So it was like this great cleansing. And then over the next 20 years, wherever he was, he had taken on the name of Swami Deva Leelananda.
This is the Philippine guy.
This is my Philippine guy. He was doing meditation experiments with the Harvard Medical School. He was still consulting with NASA. So here again, science and faith were sort of converging. And so I continued meeting him over many years. I personally did not go through psychic surgery, but I stopped in the Philippines to see his mother and to witness psychic surgery, and it's quite extraordinary. But when you think of laser surgery today, it's really the same.
So what happens? Is there blood involved? And
no, they just pass like laser rays, and we are atoms. I mean, so the skin just opens up.
You've seen that?
I've seen this. In
India or in the Philippines?
No, in the Philippines with his mother. And it just opens up very neatly, and they go in and they take out whatever. It's exactly, I've seen laser surgery today. And it's really exactly like that. But they use their body as the conducting device. And because I'm a pranic healer, I study auras. And all of you must have gone through a situation where you walk into a room and for no reason dislike a person. You just want to get out. And conversely, all of you must have walked into a room and suddenly warmed to somebody. If this is not vibration and energy, what is? And now with Kirlian photography and so on, which I talk about, and now computers do it, my healers and my Ayurvedic doctors do it. They take a photograph of you in front of a white wall and they feed it into the computer, and the entire aura photograph comes out. And I do it periodically, and I know if I'm very stressed, my aura is not balanced, and if I'm fine, my aura is completely balanced on the right and the left side. So it is a science now. You know, I feel very much that a lot of traditional knowledge in countries like China and India, and I'm sure Africa and Egypt and so on, has been passed down from mother to son or mother to child, and we have lost why we do certain things. So we still use haldi if we are cut, but till some American scientist proves it to us, the so-called Indian scientist, the Indian medical professional will laugh at it. We have forgotten a lot of the scientific proof and the history, and we wait for the scientist in the West.
Well, we wait for empirical validation.
But what is empirical validation?
True.
What is intuitive validation and what is empirical validation? True. So much of what we have known intuitively. I mean, our tribal cultures have eaten insects forever. And today scientists and
telling us about
climate people are
microbes,
telling
yeah.
us that the only way of being able to feed future generations is if we all start eating insects.
True, true. So, Malika, there is this fascinating combination that you carry between science and art, and between what your father stood for and what your mother stood for. And for people like me, it's fascinating because both of them were iconic personalities, and it comes across that you were equally you adored both of them and imbibed from both of them. Tell us a little about your relationship with your father and then with your mother. What kind of relationship did you have? Because I know it was very close, but what was the substance of it?
Well, neither Papa nor Amma thought that these were two ends of a
Spectrum.
spectrum. Papa adored the arts, which is why I think he fell in love with Amma. And Amma was very analytical.
Oh.
So could have been a scientist. The reason I didn't take science is because in those days you actually had to cut a frog. And my vegetarian instincts were appalled by this. Today they do it on a computer. But so that's why I took economics. They had made a pact with each other that till the younger child, which was me, was 12 years old, one parent would always be at home. And in those early years, it was always Amma who was out. So Papa was literally left holding the baby. Whenever I got into scrapes in school, whenever I got rusticated by my principal, who happened to be Papa's elder sister, when I was 11 years old, was the time that a lot of East African Gujarati children were coming back because the whole exodus had started. And I went to this school called Shreyas, which was a school that Madam Montessori started. It was the first Montessori school in India. And a lot of Gujarati, especially Patel children, got sent into the hostel there. And usually they were much older than us in our class. So two boys had an argument about whose girlfriend I was, and one knifed the other. And so the boy was taken to hospital. I had no interest in either of them. But my aunt, being my aunt, called me and said, there's no smoke without a fire, you must have egged them on. And I was really upset. And of course, parent was called, happened to be Papa. So he went in and came out with a grin from here to here, and he said, I knew it would start, but not this early. So then he took me home, and I was very upset. I said, you know, how can she not believe me? When I'm telling the truth, I had nothing to do with this. I don't know these guys very well. And he sat me down and he said, you know, Malika, there are people who follow society's rules, and there are the outliers. And you have to decide whether you want to be with society, follow the rules made, follow what is acceptable, follow what is the done thing, or you have to understand that you are taking a path where you will be stoned and abused. And I didn't think that I would have to discuss this with you before you were 17 or 18, but you've obviously come to that point. And I remember actually sitting down for 3 days and thinking about this very seriously and looking at my parents' lives and understanding that they were definitely the outliers. And going back to my father, and at 11 taking that decision that I had to follow my own truth. I couldn't do what society expected of me because there was so much hypocrisy. And I think in many ways my life was set at that moment. So Papa and I had a strange relationship because I was known as my mother's calf. I was always be clinging to my mother. And, unlike everything that fiction tells you, it wasn't the father-daughter who were close. It was the father-son who were close and the mother-daughter who were very close. And then
You were devastated when he passed away.
I was completely devastated. And at one stage, I was sleeping in their room and I woke up and I heard my mother sobbing. Again, I was about 11 and discovered that Papa was having an affair and that it completely destroyed my mother.
That's not in the book.
No, but it's in Rocket Boys.
Ah, okay.
And it's in his biography.
Wow.
And it's in hers as well.
Whoa.
And I spent the next 3 years plotting how to kill Dr. Kamla Chaudhary. I looked up how to make a Molotov cocktail. No, I'm not joking, seriously. And how to blow up her car. And I stopped talking to my father completely. Would walk out if he came in, would slam down the phone if he called, and was totally protective of my mother and said, leave him. And she said, but we both love each other very much. And I said, but if he's treating you like this, I'll come with you. I don't know about Karthikeya, but I'll come with you. So just leave him. We'll go somewhere. We'll take the school and go. And I wasn't old enough to understand the many nuances of being in love and loving and loving two people and all of that. But I started understanding that at 14. And I reconnected with Papa.
And how many years did this happen before he passed away then?
I only had 3 years with him. I only had 3 years.
Is that what added to the
Yes,
grief?
yes, very much. And I understood, we had long conversations together about what is right, what is wrong, what is ethical, what is not. And he would say to me, if I'm also in love with Dr. Kamla Chaudhary, lying to either your mother or Kamla Chaudhary is not the correct thing to do. I am weak. I am in a position where both of them are unhappy. You are unhappy with me, but I can't lie to you. I have too much respect. And it was a cauldron of 3 years of understanding the nuances of right and wrong, of how sometimes the whole truth is not the right thing to do, of how to navigate at every minute whether being ethically correct is the compassionate thing to do, whether having my conscience clear is the correct thing to do for somebody who may not be able to take it, whose fragility might get completely destroyed, and whose fragility is in your hands, and it's in the hands of your sensitivity and your ability to be able to say, yes, I have lied about this, but I don't think the truth is what will lead to anybody's happiness or anybody's sense of peace or serenity or mental health or any of those.
How
and it's
brave of your father to discuss this with
something,
you.
Yeah. We became intensely close. We became so close, in fact. All this time I was Amma's protector, till she passed away. I was Amma's knight in shining armor, and we were very, very close. But those 3 years, I remember one time, I must have been 16. Papa had just been made the president of the International Nuclear Disarmament Movement. Papa was completely against nuclear armament. And it was called the Pugwash, and it was centered in Vienna. And Papa had gone for a big conference there.
I think there's a photograph of you with him in the book having
Yes.
the best
Yes.
ice cream.
Yeah. And, you know, in those days, I mean, a lot of you will remember, if you wanted to book a call, you first had to book it. And then you had 3 days of, Madam, pending hai. Do you remember? I mean, there are lots of people here who remember that.
We all do.
And I remember getting through to him 48 hours later. And before he even said hello, I said, Papa, what's the matter? And he said, how do you know? And I said, I've been feeling it for 2 days that something is the matter. And he said, our government is trying to bulldoze me into India going nuclear. And I am devastated. But that was the kind of closeness that was developed. And so when 1 year later, on his way back from Trivandrum to take me dancing for New Year's Eve to the Gymkhana Club in Ahmedabad, something we hadn't done for many years, instead came the news that he had died in his sleep. He had had a medical checkup 24 hours earlier, We had both been in Bombay, and I was leaving for my film shooting at 5 in the morning. He was leaving for the airport. And I said to him, Papa, what is with the medical? He said, my blood pressure is normal. Everything is normal. Don't worry. I shall dance the night with you. We still don't know why he passed away. The CIA will not release its papers. But a book has come out 2 years ago of a CIA operative who says that from 1966, when Homi Bhabha was killed in the plane crash, till 1971, that person had been asked to get rid of the 2 top scientists in India. People ask me, why didn't you have a post-mortem done? Neither my grandmother nor my mother really needed to know why he had died. He had died, and they were both completely destroyed, and they didn't want him to be cut up, and they just wanted to spend the last 12 hours with him. So, but that's as it is.
Gosh. You know, there is just so much trauma behind your life. And looking at you, I watched you dance, I watched you talk. I had no, this is what growing older, you realize that what you see is just the surface. And there's a whole life and history. And I mean, so that's what comes through in your book. To tell us about your mother and you, because that's a very tender, protective, you became more like her mother towards the end.
Yes. But that was only after when she was 97. That's acceptable, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so Amma was always the center of my attention. So anybody doing anything to Amma, saying anything to Amma was not okay. She was somebody who really only came to life on stage. It was like a light bulb went on inside her. And my early understanding of the word spiritual comes from watching Amma dance as a child, sitting with the musicians and watching her dance. And I didn't know what it was, but it was like something that was otherworldly. I'm not a religious person at all, and in today's India, I'm very far and very hateful towards and hating towards what we have made religion into. But spirituality I understood. And Amma and I never had the traumas that most mothers and daughters have. Except for her banning my going out alone with young men at midnight when I was 12 or 13 years old, and allowing me to go out to films and so on only in a group, which I argued with her. And she said, you know, when you're 18, you can do whatever you want. But till then, I have to protect you from a society that will call you a whore. And I don't want you at 18 to tell me, why didn't you tell me then? So even if it's difficult to find other people to go out with, it's not that I don't trust you. They can stay all night in your room. I have no issues with that. But I don't want you to be in a situation where this dirty, hypocritical society points fingers at you and gives you a reputation long before you are able to decide whether you want that reputation or not. So we never had things. I had a period where I was also deeply in love with 2 men. I was living with both of them.
At the same time?
At the same time.
Living with both of them at the same time?
Living with both of them at the same time.
How is that possible, Malika?
It was very possible. We were all 3 great friends, and that helped. And Amma was sort of disapproving. And I said to her, you know, you equate love with marriage, and I don't. And that's the big generation gap. We don't have other generational gaps. But you think love leads to marriage. And for me, love is just love. And so we used to have these discussions. And I would tell her that, isn't it better to know that somebody, the way they comb their hair and the way they leave hair in the basin is something that totally puts me off. Isn't it better to know that before I get married? Because it'll lead to a very quick divorce. And many years later, I was on tour and I walked into my mother's office, and one of my dancers had come to tell my mother that she was getting married. And there was Amma saying, "But why don't you try living together? It's much safer." so, so she always said that I made a feminist out of her.
But you did get married.
But I did get married, but I got married. I had decided that if I ever wanted a child, and if I found the person whose child I wanted, then I would get married, because I didn't want the child to have a trauma and a name and a albatross to carry before she or he could. So when I met somebody who I thought, whose child I wanted, I got married. But it wasn't in the cards at all, and it didn't last long.
And you're very honest about all of that in the book. There is this feeling that women have to, we all have so many expectations from us, and so much of, we have to comply to societal rules.
We don't have to.
Yeah, okay.
We don't have to. Say no.
Exactly. So you have kind of broken many, many barriers. But growing up in Ahmedabad, was it, being a Sarabhai and being the daughter of very famous parents, was it like a goldfish existence? Was it a privileged experience?
Oh, it was
growing
very
up?
privileged. It was not privileged because of wealth. It was privileged because of the kind of people who floated in and out of our house. I mean, from Nobel laureates to the prima ballerina to the astronauts. And both the children were encouraged all the time to be present, to ask questions, to talk about whatever they wanted. There was none of this, you are small, don't ask me. So, I mean, I remember getting into an argument about the black hole when I must have been 8 with some scientist, because Papa had told me all about the black hole. But it was a goldfish. But the Ahmedabad reputation is, "Are ye log ko to Sarabhai che kai pan karshe, kuch bhi kar le." So it was considered a strange family in any case. But it was a strange thing because from very early on, Gujarat took great pride in my being me. So till I took panga with the government after the genocide in 2002, I was very much Gujarat ka gaurav, Gujarat ni dikri, Gujarat nu naam agal padyu, etc., etc., etc. And then suddenly, because I took on the government in 2002, I became the whore of the Muslims. So it was this rise, 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 bury her. Wow. So yes, I mean, we used to go with mini skirts and leather boots and dance at the first jam sessions, and we would in Ahmedabad. I was the first woman to apply for a Royal Enfield license, and that's a funny story because this man, there's a particular route they take you when they're checking you for a license. This man took me for miles and miles and miles, and when he came back, I said, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "I have a 100-rupee bet with my other colleagues that मैं घुमाऊंगी इसको."
And you actually had your own motorbike?
I did not have my own motorbike, but I was with lots of friends who had motorbikes that I rode.
So 3 things, three professions besides your dance career, I've been fascinated by. Why did you join movies? Why did you join IIM Ahmedabad? And what was the third thing? And publishing. How did all 3 of these, and at what stage in your life did these come about?
IIM, because I was...
First came IIM.
First came IIM. No, first came movies. But I joined movies because I thought I didn't have it in me physically to be a dancer. I was a lazy, lazy child who would curl up with a book, and I saw the number of hours my mother put in, whether she was feeling good or not, whether she was sick or not, a performance had to go on, and I said, "Humse nahi hoga ye." Because I understood that unless you liked every single, was passionate about every single rehearsal, it wasn't enough to say, "I love being on stage," because 1,000 hours go behind every single stage appearance, or should go. And I didn't think I had it in me. So I went into theater. Films was easy. So I thought, I wanted to be on stage.
First you tried the Bollywood route. What was that
I
like?
didn't try the Bollywood route first. I was in Bombay. There was a very famous couple called Dr. Narayan Menon and Rekha
Oh,
Menon. Dr.
yes.
Narayan Menon,
The
is that our, that's
NCPA.
our, that's right.
Oh, is that
Is
it?
that a 5 minute,
Yeah, well,
10 minute one?
10
Okay.
Okay, okay.
So his wife, Dr. Narayan Menon was the first director
NCPA.
of
Yes,
NCPA. He
yes.
ran the India desk at BBC in London for many years, which is when my father and mother were in
I
Cambridge.
live
And
in
that's,
his apartment right now. But
are you living in his,
Pulapati,
okay. So Rekha Ben was a friend of Amma's from Shantiniketan, and I was 15 and we were on a summer holiday, and Rekha Ben had a boutique, and I parted some clothes and I saw a man looking at me, and the man came and said, "Would you like to be in my film?"
who is that man?
Man called Prabhat Mukherjee, a very dear friend of Rekha Menon's. So I was offered my first film then.
But Gujarati
No,
or?
no, Hindi
Oh,
film.
Hindi film.
Hindi film, a new wave film 10 years before the new wave actually happened. It was a film called Sonal, and it was about a young woman falling in love with a man that she finds has an incestual relationship with his sister, and how this young woman of 18 deals with it. Okay, I got a critics award for it. It never got released. The second film I did was with Bharat Bhushan's brother. It was called Muthi Bhar Chawal, and it's about a young girl in a Bombay slum whose father's hand gets cut off in a factory accident. Nobody else in the house earns, so she prostitutes herself because nobody will give her a job. And she decides that the day her brother gets a job, she will kill herself, and she lies down and lets a train run over her. This was my second film, not Bollywood at all. My third film was called Kalankini, and it's about a young girl who's brought up in a lawyer's family, seeing how her father abuses the mother and wanting her mother to leave, and the mother keeps saying, "I stay with your father because of the children's sake." And she decides that she will have a child without getting married, and how her son continues the cycle of patriarchy. So these were my first three films. Age 17 and 17 and a half, and yeah, 17 and a half, I finished these three films. And then I got completely fed up because none of these were being released. Satyadev Dubey and Saeed Mirza and people were good friends. So Satyadev Dubey said to me, "Malika, you can't just give up. You have to try one commercial film." So Nargis and Sunil Dutt were my parents' friends. So Prakash Mehra was doing a film with Sunil Dutt, and he said,
Reshma and Shera.
Huh?
Were you in Reshma and Shera?
"No, I was in Himalaya Se Uncha."
Ah, yes, of course.
And I had just started IIM, and IIM friends know what kind of schedule that is. So I had signed a contract saying I'll only come in my vacation. I went in my vacation. Several people tried to make a pass at me because I wasn't giving in to them. They left me in Sonmarg wearing a silk kurta pajama in the deepest winter. Left, I came out, nobody for 8 miles, 10 miles around. 8-10 hours later, Mr. Naidu of Naidu's hotel said, "Where is Malika?" "Arey yaar, usko to upar bhul gaye." I developed a rheumatic heart because of that. Bollywood ne badnaam kar diya, saying that she held the film up and so on. I wanted to quit. They persuaded me to do another film. I was signed up for Hera Fairy with Vinod Khanna and Amitabh Bachchan. And the first day of shooting, I was shooting a song on an under construction building on the 10th floor with Vinod Khanna. And after 10 retakes, I went to the dance director and I said, why are you making me do this? My sync is perfect. My movements are perfect. My tal is perfect. So he said, "Arey yaar, chhati ka dance karo." I picked up the chair next to me, hit him on the head, and left Bollywood.
Good for you.
So that was my history.
Amazing.
Throw it open to questions.
Yeah, let's have questions.
Well, I know everybody has something to ask, and you have millions of questions more, but that seems like a good place to open. Yes, there's a young lady there.
That's Mansa. Mansha.
Yeah. Who has just been photographed with me.
Right, thank you for that wonderful session. I've written this down. So you talked about doing movies with very tragic subjects, especially very early on in life. You talked about your father talking about with you, having conversations with you about illicit affairs, and extramarital affairs. So
He would never use that word.
So
Illicit is a patriarchal, disgusting word for people who are in loveless marriages.
I'll apologize for the wrong vocabulary, but my question still stands that you were subjected to very tragic subjects of real life. So how do you think that affected or played a role in your mental health later on in life?
I never looked at them as tragic. I mean, my father's death was certainly very tragic. But Amma had this theory. Amma said all my Bharatanatyam kids go around saying, "Kahan hai Krishna? Shiva, won't you come and love me?" Unless you've had a tragic love affair, you can't even begin to understand Bharatanatyam. So it was a bit like that. I think everybody goes through hell, their own personal hells at different types. We concoct our own hells. One of the reasons I wrote this book is to say, I'm on top of it. I've gone through all of this. I have fallen on my face 150 times. I have gone through very difficult times with my daughter, which still continue. But that's okay. That's okay. You can pick yourself up. You can deal with most anything in life if you want to. There's very rarely such a bad hand that it puts you flat. So it's really all about what you want to do.
And the book has, we've not even talked about the burn accident you had. I mean, that was
something.
And we've not even talked about your relationship with your daughter, which is so poignant. But what I want to say before we take the next question is, there's a beautiful saying by Rumi, paraphrased by Leonard Cohen, which is, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And your life embodies that. So let's have some more questions. Yeah.
Hi.
What a beautiful peacock head.
Yeah.
Spectacular.
You've talked a lot about, various forms of trauma and healing for the body and the mind that you've sort of engaged with over your life. And my question is, and please answer this as a woman. This is not for the men here, but
close your ears.
It's for the womanly side in you that you do not generally accept.
Yes. I was wondering if, separate from fighting the patriarchy in a social way, fighting people, if there was also a way to put our bodies and minds at the center of that. And what I mean by that is, I feel like, if we mapped our history, not just our lives, but like our colonial history, and then before that, on each woman, I feel like, we'd be able to like find a tether that joins indigenous healing to each and every one of us, even now. And Western psychiatry, Western diagnostics, a lot of it hasn't been written for women anyway.
No, it's all about penises and not having penises.
And women are always, we're constantly trying to find ways to heal in that framework. And I was wondering how you would, what you think about, just our bodies and how we can, turn our gaze inward and find some sort of reclamation there. I don't know if
you're making complete sense. Draupadi says to Yudhishthira, I have a womb and I have a brain and I will use both, and I say you are a weak man. I think we need to accept ourselves as human beings first. One of the reasons I wrote this book is so that young women and young men are imprisoned even more than us. Because women know they are imprisoned. Men are under the complete hypocritical belief that they are free. They are not at all free. Mard bano, they are told at the age of 3. I think I wrote it so that people can start writing their own scripts at 20 or 25. They don't have to go through everything that I went through to ask the questions that I asked because I was going through a lot of things.
One last thing I wanted. That's brilliant what you've said. Okay, sure, sure. Yeah.
Advocate, or what conclusion do you perceive that what should be the attitude of an individual, whether man or a female?
I think the journey is inward. We are under the impression that the journey is outward. And most people wait till they have their first heart attack to ask themselves what is really important in life for me. Just think of this, that from the minute you are born or when you are born was decided by your parents. Your name is decided by your parents, which school you go to, who your friends will, what you will wear, what extracurricular activities, what tuition classes, which subjects you will take, which college you will go to. You have not taken a single of these decisions. Who you will marry, when you will have your first child. So you have come without taking a single decision, and you are suddenly in charge of another life. There are only two professions in this country which require zero to get there. One is a politician and the other is a parent. One ruins society, the other ruins the family. So go inwards, ask yourself, say, a lot of us, a lot of you I'm sure, have parental pressures. हमने इतना सब कर दिया तुम्हारे लिए, but we didn't ask to be conceived. So इतना सब कर लिया तुम्हारे लिए, अपने आप के लिए किया आपने. And say, you must have a house and you must have a job. So plot it and say, okay, I am going to have 10 years in which I will fulfill these obligations that my parents think I have to them. In this 10 years, I am going to try and understand what it is that I really want to do. And slowly by slowly, very, very slowly, I'll start tasting that. And then there will come a day when I say, okay, I'm going to give myself another 10 years or another 5 years to decide whether I want to leave this completely and go into that completely, or what is it that the balance that I want. But you don't have to have that realization at 60. You can plan it from 20 if you're honest with yourself. And it's really about being honest with yourself and asking yourself, whose script am I living?
Thank you, ma'am, for this.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid we'll have to stop. Oh, we have really been asked to close, and we have the next session.
Ask me as I get off the
Okay,
stage.
sure.
Yes. Sorry about that. I know you put up your hand, but
You can ask whatever you want.
thank you for your
Thank
candor,
you so much. Yeah.
wisdom, candor, brilliance, and honesty and sense of hope. Thank you, Malvika. What a wonderful interlocutor you were. Brilliant. You were brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, from the Renaissance woman, we go to a Renaissance man. The next session is about Sri Aurobindo and is titled A Spiritual Renaissance. Sri Aurobindo dedicated his life to the transformation of humanity. In the sesquicentennial year, does anybody know what a sesquicentennial year is? Yay! People know their numbers. Yes, 150th year, when public and moral life in India is crying for a revival. Our next session is about Aurobindo and what we can learn from his life and philosophy. The cast of characters we're going to have on stage is really a tribute, I think, to the fact that he was a Renaissance man. We have a scholar and a teacher and what seems to me a natural linguist, Devdip Ganguly, a resident of Pondicherry, where Sri Aurobindo found a home. In a private conversation, I have to say that Devdeep confessed to us yesterday that despite the fact that he can speak, of course, English and Hindi and Bengali and Sanskrit and Tamil, he doesn't really know Greek and Latin. I don't know why we're allowing him on this stage. And he wrote this book about Sri Aurobindo with Gautam Chikkaramane, who is the Vice President of the Observer Research Foundation. He's an expert on politics and foreign policy and economics and clearly about Sri Aurobindo. We have Makarand Paranjpe, a novelist, a poet, is at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, a professor of English Studies at JNU, and the author of the Sri Aurobindo Reader. And in conversation with Monica Halan, who is, again, I mean, you would hardly say she's a spiritualist. Here she is writing books about a wide variety of things which don't really strike you immediately as being about Sri Aurobindo. And yet here they all coming together to have this common conversation about this Renaissance man. So welcome on stage, all of you. Oh, Rahul?
Just like to say a few words.
Yes, yes.
No, I just like to say a few words to tell everybody here who wants to buy books from the authors who are talking now. Malika Sarabhai is signing some books here, but I think she'll be available in the bookshop for anybody who wants to buy her book and get it signed by her. And Malika, I might add, is a very old family friend. Our family and her family go back a long, long time. I've known her, but I've not even said hello to her now. She's been surrounded by so many people. Also, I'd just like to say that anybody who wants to get their blood sugar, glucose tested, there's free testing of blood sugar, glucose right at the back of this hall. Okay, thank you very much. And the Sri Aurobindo session is on now.
Thank you. I'm audible, I hope. Yes. Great pleasure to be here. And as the introduction said, it's a very varied group of people here. I am actually an author of a best-selling book on getting your money life right. So the introduction was perfectly in place, saying that who am I and why am I here? So I'm actually going to start the session with a very small personal story. This story is about 20 years ago. We used to live in Gurgaon. So for those of you who don't know, Gautam and I are married. Our last names are different, so people don't know that. Anyway, so I was alone driving from Gurgaon. Gurgaon 20 years ago was a small village. It wasn't the millennial city. There was no public transport. And here I am driving into my office. I was a journalist at Economic Times, long journey. There was a couple standing on the road. I gave them a lift. Very unusual for me. So in the conversation, they said that they were teachers at a school, alternate school, based on the philosophy of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. And I'm saying, who is Sri Aurobindo? So from the back, the man says, what road are you driving on? I said, Aurobindo Marg. Okay. So I said, oh, okay, it's named after him. And then the lady next to me says, and you're going to drop us to Mother's school, right? I said, right. And who was the mother? I said, I don't know, some Mother Mary. Then she told me about Mother and Sri Aurobindo. And that was really the start of a personal journey which led me to many, many, many treasures which are not necessarily counted in money. And that, it's been quite a journey for all of us. And I have also contributed to the book. So Gautam and Devdeep have edited a book on the works of Sri Aurobindo. He's written 36, it's a 36 volumes across, it's not just spiritual work, it is also him as a revolutionary, as a freedom fighter. He's written on political economy. So the idea of this session is to introduce this group to Sri Aurobindo, his work, what he became later, also called the supramental sage, through this conversation. And I'm going to divide this into 4 sections. The last one is for you, 15 minutes of questions. And then the first, I'm going to open with Devdeep to say that a lot of times right now we are hearing about Aurobindo and Sri Aurobindo. So what's the difference between Aurobindo Ghosh and Sri Aurobindo?
Thank you, Monica. So he was born Aurobindo Ghosh on the 15th of August in 1872, a date which would, of course, become very significant later on. But at a very young age, he was sent to England because his father was quite an Anglophile. He wanted his children to have a proper English education. So the whole family moved to England, the children, when he was just 6 years old. And he had his entire training and education in England. Went to Cambridge, was initially preparing for the Indian civil service, which he did not want to join, and then came back to India at the age of 20. The reason we were joking about the languages is because Greek and Latin is one of the languages that Sri Aurobindo was very proficient at when he was, of course, training at Cambridge. So he comes back to India and then immerses himself in the study of the culture, the languages which he was completely cut off from. So he has a deep dive into Sanskrit, Bengali, his mother tongue, even picks up some Gujarati because he was living in Baroda under the Maharaja of Baroda, working with the Maharaja of Baroda. And so there is a period of his life where there is this engagement with Indian culture in its profoundest sense, and then it transitions to the revolutionary phase. So as you know, in 1905, Britain decides to partition the Bengal presidency, and they do it on the basis of religion rather than any other meaningful division. And that leads to a profound outcry. And around that time is when Aurobindo Ghosh moves from Baroda to Calcutta and is at the forefront of the freedom movement. A brief period of 4 years, but 4 years which radically transform the entire approach towards the revolutionary movement. Among the first persons to ask for complete independence, no compromise with the British.
He also was in jail because he
Yes.
was behind the bombings.
Yes, so he spent a year in jail. So those 4 years were...
I mean, so when people think of Sri Aurobindo now, it's this, you know, we tend to think that our spiritual leaders are very serious and very good guys.
Yeah.
But here's somebody who actually knew how to make bombs and lob them.
Yes, he was definitely at the forefront of the revolutionary movement, launching it and guiding it from behind. And then, we don't have the time to go into his full biography, but the interesting thing is that he never disregarded or he never felt any sense of regret for his life as a political leader, even though he moved to a very different dimension subsequently. So in 1910, he moves from Calcutta and comes to Pondicherry, where he remains for the next 40 years till his passing in 1950. So it is in Pondicherry that there is, of course, a dramatic shift in his outer life, but the inner work that he was focusing on had already started during the revolutionary period, but then that becomes the central focus of his life from 1910 onwards in Pondicherry. And around that time is when he starts signing his name, Sri Aurobindo. And the Sri is not an honorific, it's a part of his name. He drops the Ghosh and he is known as Sri Aurobindo. So if I were to give a two-word summary, it would be Aurobindo Ghosh, the revolutionary, and Sri Aurobindo, the mystic, the evolutionary yogi, and so on.
So if we address him today as Sri Aurobindo, for people who are not devotees, it's not that they are devotees, it's just that his name is Sri Aurobindo.
That's right.
So we should call him by his name, which is
That's
Sri
how
Aurobindo.
he signed his name.
That's how he signed his name. Makaran, relevance of both Aurobindo Ghosh and Sri Aurobindo, two distinct personalities in today's contemporary India.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. But before I answer your question, since I'm not in this book, in the sense I haven't written a chapter in this book.
And that's a mistake.
No,
the editors have to answer for this.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to say a couple of words about the book itself and its structure.
Sorry, you've written a full book on Sri Aurobindo
That's all right.
20 years ago, so please don't get so greedy.
No, what I really want to say is that Sri Aurobindo has written over 6 million words, okay? And this book is organized in a very unique fashion, which is that each volume of his complete works, there are 36 volumes, is introduced in one chapter of this book. So, you know, in this sesquicentennial year, as you heard, 150 years of Sri Aurobindo, 75 years of India, and both were born on the 15th of August, I think it's a wonderful occasion for a newer generation, young people here, even older people, whatever, to get acquainted with Sri Aurobindo. And I think, see, I edited an anthology of Sri Aurobindo's writings. So that was the traditional approach, because no one can be expected to read 36 volumes. And in the earlier centenary edition, SABCL, 1972, there were about 30 volumes. So who will read 30 volumes? Who will read 36 volumes or 6 million words? So most of us thought we should anthologize, which is take some important excerpts. But this is a unique new approach, which is each volume is introduced in one chapter. So you can look at any chapter here, and if you like the volume, you can look at the volume. They're all available free. They can be downloaded. His whole library is free. Anyone can read it. And there's also a wonderful website called The Incarnate Word, where it's available in Hindi, many languages. There are glosses. So as a teacher myself, this is an invitation for us to get acquainted with Sri Aurobindo. Having said that, I must, in a way, disagree with the drift of the question, which is Sri Aurobindo versus Aurobindo Ghosh. Because, you know, Sri Aurobindo is, in a way, the founder of integral yoga. And I don't want to dichotomize the two. In 1905, he writes to his wife, Mrinalini, that he had 3 madnesses. And one of his madnesses was he believed that he had the knowledge, the intellectual wherewithal to free India. And he says he knows it. It's in the marrow of his bones. I mean, he knows he was born to accomplish that mission, as it were. So I feel that there's a continuity between Aurobindo Ackroyd Ghosh, because his middle name was Ackroyd. We've forgotten it, many of us. And he was named after a visiting English woman. His father happened to be friend, etc. There's a whole interesting backstory to his father, his mother.
We want to go to just the relevance of both.
Yeah, so to answer that, I don't see a dichotomy. I see a continuity, because from his very early days, Sri Aurobindo had a consciousness of his mission. But the interesting part of the shift from Aurobindo Ghosh to Sri Aurobindo, actually he starts signing Sri Aurobindo around 1920, I think. So there's a gap between, you know, the revolutionary period, which ends in 1910, and the Sri Aurobindo, the inauguration of Sri Aurobindo, which is 10 years later after the mother, Mira Alfasa, very interesting personality. If you have time to talk about her, they co-create this community and ashram. And those of you who are in Delhi, even Chandigarh, there are schools. There's Mirambika in Delhi, Mother School. There's a school in Chandigarh. So it's a huge movement, in fact. But so what I'm trying to say is, while there is a continuity, it also suggests a shift in how he perceived of his mission. Right. And I want to relate it to what Amitav said in the morning. We all relate to the climate crisis because it's brought humanity or planetary existence, as it were, to a crisis. But if you read Sri Aurobindo, you'll quickly see that the climate crisis is actually a crisis of consciousness. Human consciousness is at a crisis point. And unless
absolutely.
Just one second. Yeah. All I want to say, I just want to put this idea out there. I mean, we have a choice to cooperate in our own evolution to the next phase, or to resist it. And otherwise the matrix will reboot in a way, and the human experiment will end up in smoke.
Pralay is not something that we don't know about. You know, Pralay is something that has happened, might happen again. But Gautam, I have heard you say many times that Sri Aurobindo has been cancelled. And that is true, because I didn't know. I was driving on Aurobindo Road, Aurobindo Marg, and I had no idea of who he was. So why do you say he was cancelled?
Many reasons. I could give you anecdotal reasons. I could give you empirical numbers. Anecdotally, of course, you already talked about the Sri Aurobindo mark, and even I didn't know who Sri Aurobindo was until we heard it from the person you referred to. But that's a very self-focused idea. How many people here know that Sri Aurobindo was a revolutionary? If so, any book that you can name. How many of you know? Pardon? How many of you know that he was a philosopher and any book that he has written? How many of you know that he was a spiritualist and any book, any major work? There are 36 works. How many of you know that there were 36 volumes in the first place? The fact that in the realm of scholarship, there is a website called Gestor, where all the world's papers reside. Any academics here would know, Makarand would know. Do you know how many papers or how many titles go with the name of Sri Aurobindo? 105. Now, is 105 a big number or a small number? Let's look at his philosophical equivalent or contemporary. Not contemporary, when you talk about philosophers, let's say Hegel. Hegel has 6,700 references. Let's talk about another philosopher, Plato. Plato has 8,800 or so. Sri Aurobindo was a poet, he was a literary person. Against 105, let's talk about Shakespeare, more than 20,000. Now, for the outsiders who run JSTOR and talk about scholarship the world over, to have not heard of or not explored Sri Aurobindo is very understandable. But for Indians to ignore him, to sort of put him on the sideline, remove him from curricula, is an act of it's a political action. You will not see Sri Aurobindo in any NCERT class 8, 9, 10, 11 or 12th book. I've seen it. There is one paragraph in a book that is on Bachelor of Education, where the paragraph is a written rewrite of Sri Aurobindo with about 2 lines that introduce that Sri Aurobindo was there and he wrote this. If this is not cancellation, tell me what is. Now, maybe cancel culture is a recent idea. And we've heard it get popularized in the last 1 or 2 years. But I think the essence of cancelling began on 15th August 1947, where systematically Indian philosophers were cancelled out and they were replaced with foreign. Today, many people here would know that Plato wrote Symposium, he wrote Republic, the political works, you talk about the philosophical works, you talk about, you name a subject and you will rattle off foreign names. How many of you can rattle off Indian?
We get the point that he's been cancelled, but the audience could then ask that what is it that he did which makes him not worth cancelling, and that brings me to the second section. So I think the idea that Devdeep and you had was that more people need to know what he has written, and Sri Aurobindo's writing in original is not for the weak-hearted. He takes you on a great intellectual journey. So when we think about spiritual people, we think about principles, we think about being good, but when you reach Sri Aurobindo, you need to have a very good head, because he doesn't make it easy for you. He needs you to come to his level to read. Mother is nicer, she's gentler, she'll take your hand and move you up. Sri Aurobindo says, you want to read me, you get here. And he has a killing sense of humor. So whoever finally gets down to reading Sri Aurobindo, he's not a goody-goody guy. He's got a wicked humor. He will cut and slash. So second section, about the book. Idea behind the book, why write it, who should read it, and then Devdeep, I'll come to you, how you chose the authors.
So the 150th, I've been reading Sri Aurobindo ever since that Aurobindo Mark conversation that she talked about. Every day I have read all, not 36, there are one volume which is in languages, Bengali writings, which I cannot read. And the other is, which we'll come to later when we get into a discussion. So I've read 34 volumes. Now, reading 34 volumes and reading 34 volumes, there's a difference. So I have gone through, I'm exposed to all the 34 volumes. But when somebody would ask me, which book of Sri Aurobindo should I read? I would have no answer. I would wonder, if I want to, is he a political person? So maybe Bande Mataram. Is he a philosophically inclined person? Maybe Life Divine. Does he have spiritual interest? Maybe Synthesis of Yoga. But as the 150th birth anniversary was coming, I thought that let me try and put a book together that introduces people to what Sri Aurobindo has written. And in a very basic, simple sort of a way, the 36 volumes, and we talk about each volume. As I began to think about it, I realized, you know, like I said, there is reading Sri Aurobindo and there is reading Sri Aurobindo, and I couldn't read Sri Aurobindo. So I talked to Devdeep there, he's in the ashram, and said, maybe the two of us could do it, you know, you take half, I take half. And then we realized that even half the job, we cannot do it with the kind of rigor, the kind of intensity, and people have spent decades with one book. We would not be able to do justice to it. So then we expand the book, instead of becoming an authored book, became an edited volume. And we began to call all the experts. We know people who have engaged with the Life Divine. We know people who have engaged with letters on yoga, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So we got 22 writers who have engaged with Sri Aurobindo's work over several decades, put them together. And our job really has been to stylize it, put a structure, clear up the language.
What does each chapter do?
Each chapter familiarizes you with each book. So, like you were saying, Mother is easy. So, for those who cannot read Sri Aurobindo, they should read the Mother. For those who cannot read the Mother, should read this book.
So, Devdeep, how did you choose the authors? It's difficult. I have written one chapter, Essays on the Gita, and I have to tell you, I cried tears of I don't know what, because it's a daunting task, because you're putting yourself out there intellectually, spiritually, every which way, to dare to write on what Sri Aurobindo has written. And it is not even an interpretation analysis, it's not about our lives. It is just to give an introduction to the readers on what the book is about. And just doing that was such a scary moment for me. Not moment, months for me. So how did you choose the authors? Yeah. What was the process, challenges?
So generally in my experience of interacting with people who are familiar with the body of Sri Aurobindo's writings, you come across two kinds of people. Either people who read or who have read and they find it absolutely fascinating and they engage with it over many years. Or you come across people who say, I tried 2 chapters and I've given up. So there's an aura of difficulty around reading Sri Aurobindo. So one of the ways that we went about choosing our contributors is to make it as diverse and wide-bodied as possible. So we wanted to also highlight that people from across different age groups, Indians, foreigners, men, women, you have our youngest writer is in his early 20s. The oldest one is around 80 something. So we have really a diversity.
Ashramites and
people who are
outer world.
Yeah, people. So it's not a hagiography.
No. And it's not only people who sort of who are living in Pondicherry or closely associated. I mean, they have an association with his work, but they could be from various different. And it was not only academics either. We didn't want to make it a very academic book, so we gave certain guidelines. We said about 2,000 to 3,000 words, give or take a little bit, and use at least 5 extracts from the work itself that you're talking about, so that you have a sense, a feel of the writing. Don't make the extracts too long, so we gave some specifications. So we put all that together so that you get a feel in, say, 4 or 5 pages, you get a feel of a work which might be 600 pages long. And another thing which, just to take up from what Makaran said, 6 million words, 21,000 pages, 36 volumes. It's a phenomenal body of work. And we've already touched upon the political writings. You touched upon the poetry and the literary drama. There was a little bit about his yogic, philosophical and works on yoga. There's also commentaries, extensive commentaries on the Upanishads, on the Vedas, on the Gita, and then letters that he wrote to disciples, multiple volumes of letters which speak about his whole philosophical approach, practice, and so on. So it's really something which is, it's like an invitation to discover the whole body of work.
Can I just add something to Devdeep? All the 24 authors, if you read the book, actually have given themselves into the book. It's like a sacrifice. It's like a havan. And we are the samagri. And we have, all of us have added to the best of what we could understand Sri Aurobindo and do it. And it's like an offering that we have made.
Somewhere, I believe, it looks like it's the ashram. You can't put Sri Aurobindo ashram in a box. Mother was French. so you cannot really, Christmas is celebrated in the ashram. So you can't really put this in a box, and the book is similar. But Makrand, tell us about Sri Aurobindo's philosophy very briefly, like literally 1 minute, and then does the book do justice to the books that you have read? I mean, as a critic, because you have not written a chapter, so you are the unbiased person here. Feel free, this is your moment to say what could have been done better.
See, we preempted this by asking him to write a praise on the book which is published. So, so now he has to be careful.
And there is a violent world outside in case he...
In case I step out of line. But I think Monica is asking me the most difficult questions, which is what I like. What I want to say is to refer back for a second to what Gautam was saying earlier, that when we think about the founders or the people who created the foundational discourses, or who were the discursive founders of modernity, names such as Marx or Freud or Darwin come up, And that's one reason why JSTOR has so many articles on them. And similarly, classical philosophy, at least in the West, it's Plato, and then, Enlightenment philosophers and so forth. But whenever someone wants to do a history of the discursive foundations of the supramental age. We're using this term, it sounds really whatever, like voodoo, possibly. You can't hear? Okay, so I just want to repeat that if ever someone did 100 or 200 or 300 years later, the discursive history of the age to come, then the founder of the discourse that is after modernity, I don't want to call it post-modernity because there are a lot of problems with that. One of the founders will definitely be Sri Aurobindo because he lays out the next step in the evolution of human consciousness. And if in one word you want to summarize his philosophy, what he's arguing is that the human being is not the end point of evolution. The human being is a transitory creature. And either this human being, Homo sapiens, which we heard about earlier, will be extinct because, the Homo sapien as a race has destroyed its habitat, or it will have to transform and yield to another kind of being whose consciousness is different. And this is very important because we have reached a point where the problems that we have created cannot be solved with the knowledge that we have at our disposal right now. In other words, we need a different integrative epistemology, a different way of knowing and learning. And in a way, Amitabh was saying the trees speak, but actually the atoms are speaking to each other. We are in a soup of consciousness. We are not listening, and it's only when another kind of consciousness emerges where it will be possible for all these species to thrive, where we can be custodians of this earth and co-sharers and allow human flourishing. So it's that consciousness revolution that he stands for, not just the revolutionary. You asked me Aurobindo Ghosh and Sri Aurobindo. So there was a nationalist revolutionary, and then there was the revolutionary of consciousness. So that's the one-line summary of what he stands for.
And also, would it be correct to say that his yoga begins where others let off? For instance, he does say that the purpose couldn't be to dissolve the body and attain moksha, for instance. That could not be the purpose of this. The idea is possibly to divinize this matter. But we get to a very sticky question of, and this is open to all of you, the whole species split idea is a little controversial, and it's been sort of rubbished on one and then taken to a comical level by some other people who speak about a species split. Any of you, how would you describe this? You are talking about this change of consciousness, and absolutely we are arrogant to think that it stops with us. We were amoebas, and here we are debating, but obviously it doesn't stop. So what is this species split?
I mean, I would say the first thing to recognize is that there is no status quo. Ever since evolution has begun, there is a continuous change which has taken place. We evolve in interaction with the environment around us. And that is a process that has lasted for thousands and millions of years. Leaving aside the spiritual domain, even in the field of science and science fiction, even today we are speaking about how we may evolve over the course of the next decades or centuries. More and more there is talk about how we may integrate, for example, technology with our bodies and so on. So it's a domain, the idea of how we will look in the future, look as in not physically, but how we will end up being, is a question that has fascinated us as humans for a long time. So essentially, without taking up too much time, I would just say that for Sri Aurobindo, the process of evolution, which is an ongoing process, which is even in biology, it's an ongoing process, is something which can be accelerated by the participation of a conscious will. So all yoga, in a certain sense, is a kind of conscious participation in that process of evolution.
So what Mother Nature does over millions of years, amoeba to mankind, with active participation because of the choice of reason, the gift of reason and the gift of self-reflection that we as a species have been given by nature through millions of years, here is a chance to actively participate and hasten that process, right? Unless we blow ourselves up, which is the whole climate of change.
Or be taken over by artificial intelligence, by a bunch of algorithms who are already controlling our minds through all kinds of devices, even as we sit.
That's right.
You know, we are wired to our phones and other gadgets, and we are being bombarded with propaganda of all kinds.
Right.
And it's only, so I would think that this process of the next step of evolution is also fraught with so much danger, because we are becoming more and more compulsive in our actions, far more than Freud had imagined. It's not just about our unconscious that is driving us, but it's all kinds of irrational and, you know, all kinds of other blandishments, and the pleasure, pain circuits of the brain are being constantly manipulated. And it's only when we shift from being compulsive beings to being conscious beings. And I think Devdeep mentioned something earlier which I wanted to go back to, which is, and what you also said, you know, we think that moksha is the end point of spiritual ascesis or sadhana. But what is moksha? We don't know exactly, because, I mean, the atoms, the molecules that constitute us, you know, they don't remain attached to our bodies in 6 or 7 years. You know, you know, we have a completely different body in terms of its molecular structure. So just the thing I'm trying to, the point I'm trying to make is that from a certain point of view, evolution can never be stopped. And from another point of view, everything is already perfect in the sense that matter can't be destroyed, energy can't be destroyed, matter and energy seem interchangeable. We have no boundaries. We think we have boundaries, but, you know, in the 10 top questions in science, you will see there is no boundedness to anything. There's only permeability, as it were. And you don't know where consciousness ends and where something that is not conscious begins. Therefore, to finish what I'm trying to say, I mean, I think we are all at a very interesting juncture. And in a way, that's what the word crisis means, because it can turn.
It's an opportunity as well.
It's a great opportunity.
And to your point, I mean, it's very interesting if anybody is interested in the cutting edge work in physics, theoretical physics right now, is to take the existence of consciousness as an axiomatic truth and then build space-time from that. So if anyone's interested, if you Google that, they are beginning to take that as an axiomatic point of start. That you, from space-time, you cannot go back ever to consciousness, because that's actually a manifestation of consciousness. So, you know, it's actually coming back, and they refer to spiritual traditions which call it all Maya. It's fascinating to hear scientists talk about things that we have read in our books and said, is that really true? The table is here, how is this Maya? You know, so science is beginning to come to that point. Gautam, Makarand and Devdeep, from the book, 1 or 2 chapters which resonate the most with you in terms of the books that it represents? So Gautam, Makrand, and then Devdeep, and I'll open it up for questions then.
You know, for me, all our writers, and we have both, Devdeep and I, engaged too deeply with every chapter. And so it's difficult for me to talk about chapters other than yours, of course. But in terms of books, you know what, this is a difficult question. I think you need to see our book as a bridge to the original works of Sri Aurobindo. To say that I like this chapter or that chapter is very difficult.
No, the books that you like.
The books?
Yeah, so the books that you, out of these 36, which are the books which have spoken most to you?
Okay, at different times, now you need to give me 30 seconds like Anand Ranganathan.
Anand is not here.
Yeah, so you know, you begin your journey with Sri Aurobindo with any random book. And if you are unfortunate, you will pick up the Life Divine and turn away and never return. But if you are fortunate, or if there is somebody holding your hand, and then you begin with the smaller works, let us say the political works, you will get somewhere. Whichever book you pick up, like for instance, there is this book that I carry with me all the time. It's called The Mother, which carries Sri Aurobindo's work with great profundity, and it is just 6 chapters where he talks about money, where he talks about mother. Money, for instance, when he says that money is the visible force, visible sign of a universal force. He goes beyond currencies, he goes beyond cowries, coins, he goes beyond digital money. He goes into the spirituality, he spiritualizes money. I'll repeat the line again. Money is the visible sign of a universal force. And that force acts through in a different ways. Read chapter 4 out there. Now, this is a chapter that I have read when I was editing a financial magazine. I read it today and it talks to me in a different way. Any work of Sri Aurobindo, you pick up essays on philosophy and yoga, you pick up the synthesis of yoga, any chapter. You read it 10 years ago. In fact, even that's, I mean, you know, Devdeep and I, we keep having this argument, and I say that if all our contributors were asked to write the same chapter today, which is, let us say, 6 months after they submitted it, we will get a different book. And that's nothing strange. It's because we are all constantly evolving. And in the process of evolution, the way we engage with these very profound ideas changes. If I were to write on essays on philosophy and yoga today, it would be very different from the chapter that has been written already. I think Devdeep would more or less agree with me.
Okay.
So at different points, the same book can talk to you at different ways. And various books, in any case, speak to you in their own way.
Right. You've not answered my question, so I'm going to give it to Makrand.
Okay.
Makrand, the books that have really spoken to you, I mean, most important books out of all of what is available.
No, I'll answer it in terms of the most sort of appealing chapters here, which are introductions to the books. Okay. But if you want me to talk about one book which is extraordinary, it's called The Secret of the Veda by Sri Aurobindo, because it's an amazing, I would say, feat of interpretation or hermeneutics, where all the Western and, you know, the philological, the historical, the critical, all the Western methods of reading classical texts are brought in conversation with Yaska and Shayana and the Indian, the Nirukta, all the Indian traditions of trying to understand the Vedas. And Sri Aurobindo comes up with something completely new, I think, which makes him, to me, one of the great intellectuals of our world in recent times. But to link it to one of the chapters, I think many of these chapters are finely written by people, some of whom have given their lives for Sri Aurobindo, for his, you know, philosophy, his way of life. They've tried to live by that philosophy. I know several of them, and 3 of them are sitting here, so I won't talk about their brilliant pieces, but I'll refer you to the chapter written by, the introduction written by another friend of mine, Debashish Banerjee, who is the Haridas Chaudhary Professor of Integral studies at the California Institute of Integral Studies. But I mean, this is a chapter on Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Isha Upanishads, okay? Which is a very tiny Upanishad, if all of you know it. It's very small, you can read it in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And there, Debashish is trying to explicate what Sri Aurobindo means by the idea of Vijnana. Normally, today we say Vijnan or Vigyan means science. But that's not what Sri Aurobindo means by it. So it's the faculty. See, what does the West do? After the Enlightenment, it enthrones reason. Rationality becomes the determining principle as opposed to faith, after the, scientific revolution. And Sri Aurobindo, going back to the Ishavasya Upanishad, comes up with another faculty which he believes is inherent in all of us, which is Vishesha Jnana, which is Vijnana. So it's like a switch. You flip the switch, and I'll just read you one sentence from this introduction. He says, in these essays, Sri Aurobindo presents a strong critique of both the Western commentators, the ideologically motivated projections of Indian texts, and comes up with the idea of knowledge by identity with the experience conveyed by the text. In other words, how do you understand what any text contains, any text? So here, what is being proposed is a certain kind of knowledge through identity. You enter into the spirit of the text, and the text reveals its meaning to you. And I hope that we have time later on, when we've gone back to our homes or wherever, to ponder over this. How do we know anything? And science always makes the subject-object dichotomy. There's measurement, there's instrumentation, there's verification, falsification. But here, since the object and the subject are deeply interrelated, they're two aspects of the same consciousness, you know everything already. It's already there. It's only if you can focus, awaken, and if you really experience this. Today morning we heard the Shabad. I mean, if you were alive to Ik Omkar, you could see the message there. It is a message of unity of consciousness. It is a message of the immanence.
But focus.
So just to finish the point. The point I'm trying to make is all these chapters, which are introductions to the various volumes of Sri Aurobindo's writings, are great, but some of them can open a window in our minds and help us, as it were, flip that switch. And that's the switch I guess we need to make in order to find a new way of apprehending the world.
Absolutely. And the more that you read Sri Aurobindo, he's not an easy writer at all. It's not easy initially to understand his style of writing, but once you get used to it, you understand the intellectual breadth and the intellectual honesty of him examining that issue from every possible window and then coming to the conclusion to which he does. So he doesn't talk down on anybody or anything. He simply examines it from all possible angles. Devdeep, book, yes. And then why do we call him the supramental sage?
Okay. So among the books, in two sentences, one of the books that really speaks to me is called The Human Cycle. Another title for that book is Psychology of Social Development. And it's very interesting because here is a book that is written not for an audience which has any background or prior introduction to spiritual truth or philosophy. He is approaching the question of human development as a whole, the collective development of society, looking at it, passing through different stages, so starting right back 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, without going into any specific region. He's looking at it as a movement of human progress, and then seeing how that can, where we are today and where it can possibly proceed forward. So there is this development of humans, of the collectivity from the perspective of psychology, which I find fascinating.
Teach this also somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe whoever's interested, if you Google Devdeep Ganguly, he teaches, and Makrand also teaches a course. So here I'm plugging their courses. So if you want to do their courses, I think it'll be available online.
Can I come for a second?
Yes, of course.
Maybe?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to say that the question that Sri Aurobindo asks is, what is after the mind? You know, man, Manu, Manush, Manas, it's all linked to the mind. So we are mind-endowed creatures. But what after the mind? Is there something beyond the mind? And is it available to everyone? It's not just for the few. It is, according to him, and if we are aware of it, that's what is meant by the sage of the supramental. In other words, he's inaugurating an age where a faculty beyond the mind will be available not just for a very few, not just for the Buddha under the Bodhi tree. Bodhi also means awakening, okay? The awakening of all of humanity, as it were, and the availability as a birthright for all of us of this faculty, which is higher than the mind, because it's the mind that divides all the time, measures, divides, and obviously there's a faculty which does not divide.
Makarand, and in the previous session we just heard about the psychic surgery, so I think it ties in so beautifully with this. Devdeep, quickly, and then I'll open it up for questions.
I think Makarand did a perfect job of sort of summarizing it. I would just say that Gautam and I were really happy to have this phrase in the book, Sri Aurobindo, the supramental sage, because it's a term that he coined to describe and explain a certain plane of consciousness, a certain way which ties into the way that he understands the universe and reality. And it's also a term which I think in his 150th year, see, let us be honest, we are all very much mental beings. We can talk about these things, we can write about them, but we are still doing it from the perspective of the mind. But to be able to look forward and say, look, there is something which has the potential to take us forward, which has the potential to bridge the divide between the imperfect present and an ideal future that we aspire for. That is what we want to put forward through the book, and I think that is what Sri Aurobindo represents in the evolution of the Earth's history.
And the very brave will pick up the Savitri and attempt that. Questions, please. Anybody? Yeah. Yes. Yes. Could you introduce yourself, sir?
Yes. My name is P.S. Chaudhary. My background is Army. I worked for 31 years with one Mr. S.P. Oswal. He's a Padma Bhushan awardee also. He's a businessman.
Yeah.
Since I worked with him, and I had the fortune and opportunity to raise a college by the name of Sri Aurobindo College. I can say that I was founder of that college, and before I took over the reins of this college, I did not know who Sri Aurobindo was. I shall not go into whether it is the Aurobindo Ghosh or Sri Aurobindo. I only know that to begin with he was Aurobindo Ghosh. Later on it was Sri, S-R-I, Sri Aurobindo, Sri Aurobindo. Now, I was with the college from 2003 to 2015, and we tried to tell the students and the teachers about the life and philosophy of Sri Aurobindo.
Sir, can you ask a question? We have other people wanting to
yes,
ask.
Yes,
so a quick question.
I will come to the point.
Just like, let's come to the question.
No, I found it very difficult.
Yeah.
How to teach them the philosophy. Or
okay.
This is one thing.
So one question is philosophy. Yeah.
Number two is that Mr. S.P. Oswal, he has already raised certain industrial units which are named after Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo Spinning, Aurobindo Fabrics, Aurobindo Textile, I think about 12, 13 of them. This is one thing. And number two, at Ludhiana now he is having...
Sir, I think we will just move because other people want to ask. We'll just take the philosophy question.
I just want to add...
Okay, so why don't we collect 2 or 3 questions and then they'll... because we are just completely out of time. Sorry, sir. Ma'am, you wanted to ask?
But let me complete it. That the largest auditorium is going to be built at Ludhiana.
Yes, so I think I will have to get a question now.
I just wanted to inform.
Yes, I think the audience will come and talk to you to get more on this. Sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anyone else? We'll collect 2 or 3 questions and then we can get the panelists to speak. Anybody else wants to ask? Please raise your hands.
Yes, I actually have a question, and since I have the mic, I'm going to be authoritarian and just ask. So one of the miracles, or sort of this fact that Sri Aurobindo had these 36 volumes is the incredible archiving of everything, that it was maintained, that it was archived, that it's accessible, that it hasn't been eaten by silverfish, or flooded or whatever. So I just wanted to ask about that process. I know it's a bit of a mundane question, but sometimes the respecting of something is in the way you manage it as well.
No, I think it's a...
If there's one question there, then I can get the panelists to take it. So that's the last question, and then feel free, whoever.
Good evening. Bit of a simple question, but it's nice because you'll all know what to tell us. What was the relationship, or what was the ideology of the mother, the principles and the philosophy the same as Sri Aurobindo?
Excellent.
And if you could kindly give us a little more, because it's all about the book and what we should be, but tell us a little more about his philosophy. Was it based on Vedanta? I just would like to know. Thank you.
Okay, any one of you, please. I think, just have another 4 minutes.
So about the archives, it's a really nice question, and it's a remarkable work that has been done over many decades at the Sri Aurobindo Ashram in Pondicherry. And there's a group of people, scholars, who worked on it for literally decades, putting everything together and putting them in an environment so that the manuscripts are preserved. In a certain sense, it's our most cherished heritage, his written manuscripts, and they are kept in a very temperature-controlled environment. And I can say with as much humility as I can conjure that it's one of the best maintained archives in the country. So that is really a remarkable task that has been done. The publication, of course, recently finished. All the complete works was put together. The last volume only came out in 2019 because so many letters kept coming as people passed on, their private collections came to the ashram and so on. So it's an ongoing process, and it's all available as free downloads, which is again something the community decided to do without charging for.
I think there's a principles question which a lot of people want to know. Yeah. So everyone has, Buddha has an eightfold path, this one has that path, then you do this and that.
Yeah.
Any comments on the principles that this road to Sri Aurobindo's road, or the mother's road? And I think there was a question on mother and Sri Aurobindo also, yeah.
So I think there are no principles. It's a very open source. It's very individual specific. I can't see who asked this question. Yeah. It's very individual, focused, individual specific. You can go to the library of Sri Aurobindo, pick out the idea that resonates with you. Sometimes you don't even need to read it. It can reach you on its own. But if you were to classify Sri Aurobindo's ideas, I would try 3. First, evolution has not ended. Man is a transitional being. From the mental to the supermind, from the supermind to the supramental, that evolutionary process is continuing and will continue. Yoga accelerates the process. Nature will take it anyway. Second point, he introduced something called the integral yoga, which is not a fusion of the 3 bhakti, karma, or jnana yoga, but a yoga that goes beyond this, integrates everything into a holistic approach to yoga. Sitting out here is a yoga. I was sitting outside there looking at the mountain, and I don't think I have felt so good, and thank you for inviting us here. I think the mountains are naturally spiritual. Sorry for this digression. Which is the integral yoga. And the third is divinization of the cells of our body. So you rise to the higher consciousness, and dissolve is one method, which is the extant Indian spiritual traditions, particularly the bhakti traditions. But getting that consciousness back onto earth, back into matter, back into our bodies, the cells, and transforming them is what Sri Aurobindo talks about. So I would count these 3 as the core principles.
Okay, Devdeep, any quick last words on this?
No, just to answer to the question, yes, if you understand Vedanta in the largest and widest sense, his perception is based on Vedanta. But then, as Gautam says, he builds on that and takes it forward rejecting the idea that spirituality is something that has to be cut away from life. So this is about the mother. I will, all life is yoga.
I think that's the sentence to end on.
Yeah.
All life is yoga, to the principle that, I mean, to ask for, a simple roadmap is a very mental thing, but to invite everyone to experience something, even when we ask these questions. It's not that the mind is rejected, not at all. The mind is really important. You need a GPS to arrive, so you need a roadmap. But the experiential involvement, immersion, at all levels, school, college, right now.
Yeah.
I think that's a good note
That's,
on which.
that's right.
That's how we spiritualize our experience.
And the beginning of the panel was this, that it's a very different group of people, and that's probably a clue to the kind of yoga. It's not prescriptive. They don't tell you what to do. They don't even tell you what not to do. They just point you in a direction and they're saying, you want to go, you go. You take another 1,000 births and you will do it in anyways. Abhi karna hai to you figure it out. So they don't make it easy. They don't tell you what to do. They don't tell you what not to do. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so very much for this introduction, this opening into Sri Aurobindo. Deeply appreciated. And Rahul wants to say a few words.
Well, I'd just like to say that I went to the same college in Cambridge as Sri Aurobindo, King's College in Cambridge, and there was a room where I had to do a lot of study, which was named after Sri Aurobindo in King's College. So I just wanted to mention that.
So he wasn't cancelled after all.
They didn't what?
He wasn't cancelled after all.
He wasn't cancelled. His name is still there in that room. I think it's called the Sri Aurobindo room. Small room, but full of books where students come to study. So in King's College, Cambridge, his name is very much alive.
Thank you. And I'm glad that Khushwant Singh Literary Festival has given us an opportunity to talk about it.
Next time I will definitely go there.
Yeah.
All right, so another very, very special session this afternoon. Please everyone settle down. It's Mr. Rajmohan Gandhi, no stranger to this festival, who's going to be in conversation with interlocutor Mahuma Moitra. Rajmohan Gandhi, well, a brief summary. Everybody knows him. He's a biographer, a historian. For those of you who are not aware of it, younger people in the audience maybe, it's interesting to note that important to note that his paternal grandfather is Mahatma Gandhi, his maternal grandfather, Chakravarti Rajagopalachari. But what is very important to note is his commitment to the idea of democracy. Through writing, speaking, public interventions, and dialogues, he has been engaged for 60 years in efforts for reconciliation and democratic rights. Mahu Moitra, his interlocutor, is an Indian politician and a member of parliament in the 17th Lok Sabha from Krishnanagar in West Bengal and a member of the AITC. We laud this feisty all-rounder, a former investment banker at JP Morgan Chase who studied economics and mathematics in Mount Holyoke College, and from all accounts is a fine football player. for turning her intelligence and energies to politics. Thank you. We welcome Mr. Rajmohan Gandhi and Ms. Mahua Moitra for this session titled Reflections on a 75-Year Legacy. Thank you, sir.
Hello. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I am absolutely delighted to be here, actually, for the very first time. I remember coming to Kasauli when I was many years ago as a tourist and seeing signs for this literary fest and wondering, wow, it would be wonderful to come here and listen to some of the speakers, and I never thought I'd be sitting here on stage. And in such exalted company, I am absolutely privileged and honored to be the interlocutor for this session with the most wonderful Mr. Rajmohan Gandhi. We've already been introduced to him, and the finest historians. He's written extensively on Sardar Patel, book on Ambedkar and Gandhi. He's also written a history of the Punjab, history of South India. But what we are here to discuss today is this, what it lacks in size, it more than enough makes up in sort of thought. It's called India After 1947, Reflections and Recollections. And I'm going to try and engage him in conversation. What I will put out there right in the beginning is that I am just the interlocutor here. I've been on enough panels where the moderator thinks they're the speaker, and I promised myself I would not get into that trap. So I'm just going to lead on to that. Thank you, Mr. Gandhi, for being here. Your book, a lot of people here read the book? Not many, okay. So it's, this book, it says Reflections and Recollections after 1947, but it's not a historical narrative, it isn't. It's very much topical. It talks about what's going on in India today, and what it does in very short chapters is try and link up what's happening today to how we got there from 1947. What you've also done, if I might rather cheekily add, is played it quite safe. So you've tried to stay away from controversy. Anything that is could dish up a firestorm, you've stayed away from. But at the same time, what you've done is given people so much food for thought. You don't think for the reader. When I was reading it, you had all the dots, and it was up to me to connect them how I wanted. And I think that's part of the great things about a book so small. I mean, the 5 chapters you've got, you lay out the key issues, and each issue talks about a certain. The first one of the chapters, you say, yes, there is Ram. You don't talk about, is there a debate about should there be Ram? Is there no Ram? You say, yes, there is Ram. You state it. So when you were writing the book, if I may start with that, what were you thinking about? What is it that you wanted to give the reader? Was it your perspective or?
So before I answer that, may I say one or two other things?
Yes, please.
And before I say anything, I want to know whether I'm being heard. And if I'm not being heard, somebody should shout ask me to speak into the mic. Thank you. So I want to say, first of all, that for troubled and saddened minds like mine, this trip to Kasauli is a blessing. This morning, I saw the wide end-to-end range of the peaks formerly dressed in snow and white, and concluded that there was still beauty in the world, and nobility in the world, and dignity and wonder in the world. I also want to add that today's India misses Khushwant Singh. Unafraid, candid, merciless, witty, puncturing humbug and pomposity, upholding free speech, dissent, and human rights. I also miss him in relation to my latest book, Mahua, because some of the stories I give in it are of the India and New Delhi of the 1940s and 1950s. They speak directly to people of Khushwant Singh's time, not to all the young people here today, so I miss him for that reason too. It would have been fantastic for me to have Khushwant Singh also read this book. I will mention one story about Khushwant Singh and myself. This was after he had become editor of the Hindustan Times, of which my father was editor for a very long time. I went to see Mr. Khushwant Singh, I forget in connection with what. There he was, seated in a very big leather chair behind a fairly large desk. I sat in front of him, and as soon as or rather before I sat, he moved away from his chair, came around to where I was and said, "Raj Mohan, you must come and sit in my chair." He insisted on it, but then I also am a stubborn man and I refused to sit in that chair. But this gives you an idea of what Khushwant Singh was like. And I'll just say one more thing before I try to respond to your question, which I've already forgotten, by the way. I wanted to say that Kasauli is a very good place to visualize a united subcontinent. So beyond these wonderful hills and peaks that all of us saw today, a fantastic view. Behind those mountains is Tibet and China. And if I were a Chinese soldier in Ladakh or in any place north of Arunachal, I would say, oh, thank God, the subcontinent is not united. And so at some point, I hope you will let me talk about partition, which is a very important question on my mind. So now, what was your question?
My question was, is there a reason you wrote the book the way you did? Is there a reason you picked the topics in just those 5 chapters?
Well, I wanted to write a short book. I wanted to write an interesting book. I wanted people who started reading the book to end the book. So above all, I wanted it to be an interesting book. I hope that it manages to be that. But yes, I also wanted to relate my personal story post-independence, my family's story to some extent. And I do have a chapter on partition, which I want to discuss if you give me the chance. And of course, I have a chapter called Gandhi is Safe, in which I deal with many questions related to Gandhi. And then there is the question of what next? What happens to India tomorrow?
Perfect. So we'll try and go through it chapter by chapter, because you said it's a short book, it's a systematic book. And the first chapter, very topical today, what struck me is that you didn't go into the question of, is there a Ram? Or, is there a Ram? You just say, yes, there is Ram. And you don't get into the debate, but you go on to write about how you perceive Ram. And then you kind of talk about how the perception of Ram has morphed, right? So Ram was an integral part of your life. When you talk about it in your family, it was almost an academic exercise also, because your father was very deeply involved in Atkins, who was a British missionary in the Garhwal, who translated Tulsidasa's Ramcharitmanas into English.
Into English verse.
Into English verse, exactly. And your father was very deeply involved in the publishing of it. Your mother also translated the English retelling of the Ramayana, Rajaji's, into Hindi.
Yes,
so while there was this academic exercise going on in the background, Ram was also very, in the subconscious everywhere, because you had people, when they greeted each other, normal people who said, Jai Ram Ji ki, which you have even today.
Yes, yes.
When someone passed away and they were carrying a bier, you would hear chants of Ram Naam Satya Hai.
Yes.
And, the idea of Ram is that he's all forgiving, he's all powerful. But never was the need, you never heard anybody, even the most outright supporters or champions of Ram, come out and talk about that there was a need for a mosque in his birthplace. And you mentioned this in your book. And I was trying to think about, even growing up in Bengal, in my family, which is not a religious family at all, when you were alone and you were scared, my mother would say a little verse in Bengali, and it says, Bhoot amar pret, shakchunni amar jhi, Ram Lakhon shate ache, bhoyti amar ki. It says, the ghosts are all my slaves. If Ram and Lakshman are with me, why should I be scared? So this idea of Ram being the protector, this was there. But you see, Ram now has almost morphed into a patriot hero. It's no longer this image of the all-powerful. And Ram, when you think of Mahavir or Guru Nanak or the Buddha, these are not just historical figures. These were human beings. Ram, by all accounts, is divine. It's not a human being. So when you see him circumscribed, almost limited by a birthplace or a date or a time, what is it that you feel? Are we lessening Ram? You say, yes, there is Ram. But is this version of Ram today lesser than the one that you grew up with?
Of course, it's a mighty lessening. It's a mighty shrinkage. My goodness, as I grew up, by the way, I should add that my brother Ramchandra was, so Ram was with us all the time. And everybody knows about Gandhi's devotion to the sound Ram, to the word Ram, to songs about Ram. But one important thing is that all of us and all the people who said Jai Ram Ji Ki or who spoke about Ram Nam Satya Hai, they all imagined, believed Ram to be with us now, ever present. Not a hero who fought wars and died several centuries or several thousands of years ago, but a living presence. So many wonderful Sikh friends of mine were called Ram Singhs. They were not Hindus, but Ram was something very real for them and is something very real for them. So one shock to me as I moved through the 80s and the 90s and the Ram Mandir movement spread, my goodness, this is a shrinkage of Ram. This is turning an eternal force, a wonderful presence for everybody, for children, for sick people, into some kind of political hero. I mean, I was stunned.
You quote Gandhi when he says, Ram is not a man with 2 hands or 2 feet, but if I am a perfect fit, it is due to Ram.
Yes.
So Ram is not man, but if I am man, it is due to Ram. And it almost elevates to the thought that Ram is not human, but if I am human and I imbibe the qualities of humanity, it is almost because of Ram.
And if I may also add that Gandhi again and again said, so is the case with Krishna.
Yes.
So is the case with Shiva. So is the case with Almighty God. So is the case with Allah, with Khuda, with Vaheguru. So he also made sure that people all over the world, humankind addresses the Almighty, the Eternal, in different ways, but perhaps they're all referring to the same current, present force.
The all-pervasive. You then move on to the second chapter where you've spoken of both Akhand Bharat and partition. And they're both in the same chapter. And since you wanted to speak about partition, I'll try and there are a few points on Akhand Bharat that I do think we should all talk about. Because nowadays, I hear in political speeches everywhere, in debates everywhere, this idea of Akhand Bharat. Yeah. And you say very early on in the book, in chapter 2, you say, there's something we all need to remember, that in the last 2,500 years, there only been, even the idea of an Akhand Bharat has been reached only thrice. One is during the Emperor Ashoka's reign, one is during the Mughals, and one is during the British. And what about the champions of Akhand Bharat today? Do they know which Akhand Bharat they want? It certainly can't be the one of Ashoka because he's too tolerant, he's too inclusive, and he's almost, too Buddhist. It certainly can't be the Akhand Bharat of the Mughals. And it can't be the Akhand Bharat of the British. So which Akhand Bharat are we really talking about? And then you go on to say, you say that it's India, the very nature of India today means its symbols are diverse. So when you look at India, what do you think of the Ashoka pillar? Equally, you think of the Red Fort, Shah Jahan. You think of the Gateway of India, constructed by the British. So a symbol is ringing true only when it has been ratified over time. A symbol of India doesn't become a symbol, you say it is just because it has been launched before cameras with fireworks. So this is something, so Akhand Bharat over the ages has not been defined by geography, it's been defined by inclusiveness. So what are your thoughts on that when you talk about Akhand Bharat?
First of all, I'd like to say that your summary of my thoughts is fabulous.
Thank you. I've been up all night reading this book.
So, there was a time, some years ago, not now at all, but about 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago, there were many Pakistanis who secretly said, yes, we would really like reunification. They don't say it now at all today. But you know, the very last people who want reunification today are the Hindu supremacists. The last thing they want, the thing that terrifies them to death, is the idea that the Muslims of Pakistan and the Muslims of Bangladesh will become part of Akhand Bharat. I mean, 15% Muslims is too much for them. What will happen when 33% of the subcontinent becomes Muslim? So the Akhand Bharat enthusiasts don't want Akhand Bharat. And the other thing I want to mention here when it comes to partition, who were the people who opposed partition till the very end? This is a historical question. And people should do their own research. I'll tell you what my research done over 30 or 40 years has told me. Frankly, the one individual who till the very end opposed partition, who was hurt the most by it, saddened the most by it, who cried the most about it in private, was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. But there were some other people also. When the Congress had this meeting in June of 47 to vote on the Mountbatten Plan, and they assented to it. They assented to the partition of India. It was a vote passed in complete silence. It was the only resolution passed in complete silence other than condolence resolution when somebody died. But some people opposed it at the time. One was Purushottam Das Tandon. We must admit that. He is today, he was in the Congress then, but he today is a figure that is greatly praised by the Hindu right. It is absolutely true that Purushottam Das Tandon opposed the resolution in a passionate speech. But another man who opposed it very strongly, very powerfully, was a man who's completely forgotten today. His name is Saifuddin Kichlu. Many here don't even know who he was. He was a Kashmiri. He was an Indian from Kashmir. And do you know, he was one of the men, along with another remarkable man called Dr. Satyapal. These two men were responsible for the great movement in Amritsar that culminated in the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. Saifuddin Kichlu and Satyapal led a tremendous movement in Amritsar in April 1919. And because of that movement, martial law was established and Jallianwala Bagh massacre took place. That Saifuddin Kichlu, forgotten today, freedom fighter for India, he fought passionately against Pakistan and spoke passionately. There were a few others also. But I wanted all of you to remember when it comes to yes, there were horrors of partition. Of course, there were horrors committed on all sides, by all sides, against all sides. And let us also remember with pride that so many wonderful Punjabis protected Punjabis of the other religion at that time. How did millions of Punjabis cross the borders? Because Hindus and Sikhs in East Punjab helped Muslims to go to the other side. And because Muslims in West Punjab helped Sikhs and Hindus to come to this side. Punjabis protected fellow Punjabis. Many more Punjabis protected fellow Punjabis than they killed fellow Punjabis. So this is what happened during partition. And one last point I want to make about partition, that the Act of Parliament, British Parliament, that created independent India legally, created independent Pakistan legally, signed by King George VI at the time, does not say that a Muslim nation is being created or that a Hindu nation will also remain. it spoke of Muslim majority areas separating and forming Pakistan, of course, at that time, in two wings. It is absolutely true that there were passionate voices on both sides. Jinnah and many other Muslim League leaders passionately said that India has two nations, Muslims and Hindus. Savarkar, much earlier than Jinnah, passionately said that India has two nations, one Muslim and one Hindu. But a great number of Indians, Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, so many others, said no, no, no. There is mistrust, there is unhappiness, there is division, but Indians can manage these differences and all Indians of all backgrounds can live together. And it's important to recognize that what took place in August of 1947 was not a division of communities that ek taraf Musalman jayenge, this taraf Hindus rahenge. It was a separation of geographical areas. So with that, I will stop.
There's one more thing in the chapter on, you go from Akhand Bharat and you go into partition, and there's one line in there which struck me, and it said that when our founding fathers were talking about free Pakistan and India, the idea was, it was not just about national identity, but it was also about individual freedoms. And it talks about not just azadi, but about insaf. And the Hindu right, it says, today they're not unhappy that partition happened. What they're unhappy about is that in spite of partition, why are Muslims still here? This is the rhetoric that you see over and over again in hate speech very recently. And the post-independence generation, such as yourself, when you grew up 10 years old, 12 years old, 15 years old during partition, you thought of Pakistan as a Muslim country, but you never thought of India as a Hindu country, never. No. Do you see today that we are moving further and further towards that? And for someone like you who's seen through it, how do you see that idea almost of insaf, where 15% of the population should be given equal rights and should be treated as equals, go out the window? How does that make you feel?
Well, I'm pained. I'm deeply saddened. Sometimes I feel angry. I'm unhappy. I don't have words enough. Are we really proud of a situation where the great, vast Hindu majority, which is in numbers overwhelmingly strong, economically much better off than the Muslims, politically supremely powerful, where the Muslim percentage in our legislatures is well below the Muslim percentage of the population? For this great Hindu majority with its fantastic heritage and civilization, for it to derive pride, self-importance only from the humiliation of Muslims? Yeah. Is this the source of our satisfaction, of our pride, of our sense of our role in the world? तो हमने इनको दबा दिया, इनको चुप करा दिया. India is hungry for another kind of greatness.
Yeah. It's almost like we're too good for that. You know, we're really too good for us to be able to have to feel good by doing things like that. And you've really brought it out very well. And then you go on to chapter 3, which you call it a partly personal story. And it's partly personal, but you also lay out very nicely as to what was happening then that made us think about what's really making India. And you start with how when Dr. Ambedkar was an untouchable and he was invited to draw up the rule book for a society that had condoned class oppression for centuries. And hundreds of legislators who were high caste Hindus themselves joined him in this endeavor. And it was not just a quest for equality, but it was a quest for penitence, for repentance almost. That here is an untouchable, part of a class that we have suppressed and oppressed for so long. And he's got the pen. He's going to tell us what our future is going to look like. And there's something so wonderful in that. And then you talk about, just after Gandhi's assassination, you have Ambedkar telling Rajendra Prasad that due to the assassination, it is all the more necessary that the clause on fraternity be inserted into the preamble, because we need brotherhood all the more. Now, if you contrast this with what is happening today, and yes, you can say you've got a couple of nutters who are going there and saying Goli Maar Do. You can say, yes, there are a couple of nutters who are going and saying boycott Muslims and don't patronize their shops and don't patronize businesses. And even if we can condone that not so small minority, what happens to the rest of the vast majority who seem to feel no repentance and no shame? And, you know, how do you think when our founding fathers were so clear in what they needed to do, how is it that 75 years down the line that we as a society, as a civilization, are not being able to sort of even condone, forget the sins of our past, but condone what is happening around us every day? Who do we think is going to do it?
No, I'm very glad that you have zeroed in on this point also, Mahua. It is indeed true, by the way, that today many who support the, you might say, the Hindutva project or the Hindu supremacy project also say, and I think they're very serious about it, that they want to include the Dalits in it, they want to include the Adivasis in the project, the OBCs in the project, and I think they are sincere. Many of them, and politically too, of course, it suits them, and it has worked for them in many elections, as we all know. But your point about penitence is very important. If you read the debates of the Constituent Assembly, you will find how so many speakers, participants in the debate, accepted that over centuries, this very great, deep offense was committed by so many of the Hindu high castes. The abolition of untouchability, which was incorporated in the Constitution, was incorporated as a form of repentance. Today, it is political mobilization. I welcome it, of course. Of course, this willingness now to work with the low castes, work with the Adivasis, with the OBCs, does not extend to Muslims and Christians, yes, which is a great limitation. I hope one day that it will extend beyond that. But I also feel that we will not deal with this very great legacy of the crime of centuries if we don't accept that very great injuries were done to dignity, self-respect. We humiliated people for centuries, and we don't end that humiliation by saying, "Acha, itne percent aapko yahan mil jayenge, itne percent aapko wahan mil jayenge."
Yeah. You talk about Nehru in a very personal way. And there are some stories in there. But what stands out is that you almost revere him for, not for what he was, but more for what he stood for. And you said, you know, he stood for this idea of individual freedom, which he practiced every day. And you felt it yourself, because as a prime minister, he was in charge of giving off a room in Vigyan Bhavan, was it not? That allowed you to go and rent it to have an MRA meeting. Yeah. And it's wonderful that we once had a country where you could actually go up to the prime minister and say, "Oh, excuse me, I want to rent a room. Will you give it to me?" So it's wonderful that you went up there.
But it's not so wonderful that you had to go to a prime minister to rent a room.
Yeah, that's true. But no, what you said it in the context of, you said in the context of that, you know, he had his reservations about the MRA, yeah, but at the same time, he rented the space for you.
He did.
And you then go on to say, you said, you know, you feel offended by the false stories about Nehru. And he spent, like there are false stories about Gandhi. There is a story about, he said, even today there are WhatsApp forwards going around saying Gandhi told Hindus to turn the other cheek to Muslims. So what did it mean? That we should get thappad from Muslims? And of course, this is a biblical reference. It has nothing to do with Gandhi. When they asked Gandhi, did you go and meet Jinnah? And he said, I will meet him 70 times 7. And of course, that's a biblical reference where Peter asked Jesus, how many times should I forgive a brother who is an offender? And Jesus says 70 times 7. So as with Gandhi...
Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, I do say, you know, this is a very widely, all over India, many powerful speakers in Hindi all across India say कि गांधी ने सिखाया कि एक गाल पे चप्पड़ को थप्पड़ मारता है तो दूसरा गाल दो, ये गांधी का पाप है, महापाप है। तो मैं कहता हूँ उस किताब में कि भाई जीसस क्राइस्ट कहेंगे कि भाई मेरा विचार है, मुझे तो कम से कम मेरे विचार का क्रेडिट दो, ये कॉपीराइट मेरा है, गांधी का नहीं है।
Right. So similarly, as with the sort of false propaganda around Gandhi, even with Nehru, you talk about, you say you feel offended by the false stories about Nehru. You know, he spent 55 years in public life, he spent 14 years in jail, 17 as prime minister. He embraced dissent and debate. And, you know, tell us how you miss that in public life when we see all of this going around against Nehru and there's almost no one left to fight for him. I see that in parliament. It's almost if you stand up, I'll have somebody tell me, oh, you're not even in the Congress. What are you defending Nehru? I mean, that's how low the narrative has come. So what do you feel about this?
Before I say what I feel about this, let me also say this, that this, you know, millions and millions, just as in the United States, a great many white Americans now believe that Barack Obama was not born in America. उसी तरह से करोड़ों हिंदुस्तानी मुल्क भर में आजकल ये मानते हैं कि मोतीलाल नेहरू तो मुसलमान थे, है ना? This lie has been spread for years and years and years. Now, if Motilal Nehru or one of his forebears was a Muslim, which was not the case, but that would not have been a crime. You can't kill or punish or accuse a person of something because your ancestor was this or that. That's absurd, of course. But Jawaharlal Nehru, as Mahua says, 14 years is a very long time, dear friends. 14 years in prison, and then his wife dies shortly after he's released. And then all these false stories about a good man, a great man, a brilliant man. You can criticize his policies, but what right have you to spread this utter falsehood? No, I feel deeply about it. And I feel more deeply about it when I witness the Himalayas. Jawaharlal Nehru loved the Himalayas. The Himalayas will protest, the earth will protest. You please feel free to criticize his policies as strongly as you want. But don't stoop so low as to tell filthy lies about a noble and a good man.
I mean, it is almost humbling and reassuring to even, I think, see someone who can be as emotional about this issue, because I think certainly this generation doesn't have the capacity to even feel that strongly. And I heard this story from my mother, and I don't know if it's true, where she said, when Lata Mangeshkar sang Ye Mere Watan Ke Log, and there's a line in there, Jab Ghayal Hue Himalay, and Pandit Nehru had tears in his eyes. And today when you're talking about him and the Himalayas, you have tears in your eyes. So, you know, there are these stories that are passed down, which all of them come to form a full circle. You talk again of this destructive trait of Indian history, which you link up today to the past, and you say that, you know, Indian history and Indian politics has always had this space where the motto has been, forget your foes, finish off your allies. And you talk of a time where Chaudhry Charan Singh, Moraji Desai, and Babu Jagjeevan Rao were together. And Jagjeevan Ram tells Morarji Desai, "Hamari jodi nahi chalegi." And this obviously continues to plague us even today, because even someone like me, wherever you go, you're faced with the question of why isn't there opposition unity, and why can't you guys get your act together, or why aren't you together? What do you think, even when we have what is a common, when we all seem to know what the common enemy, for lack of a better word, is, or what the anti-ideology is, what is it about us in India that you think that this destructive trait continues to plague us even today?
Well, I wish I had an answer for, I can give an intellectual answer to this. I wish I had a solution for this bimari. But let me restate the bimari. The philosophy is, the policy is, forget your enemies, finish your allies. Forget your enemies, finish your allies. And we have to find a solution to this. This requires large-heartedness, this requires patience, this requires some people who maintain contact with all sides will bring them together. This requires, perhaps requires the spouse of one of these principal players telling the spouse strongly, stop this nonsense, get on with something constructive. You know, constructive roles can be played by ordinary people, not just by politicians or by well-known or prominent people. It is a very big, by the way, it's not only in politics. It is in so many areas of our national life. Forget your adversary, finish your allies. So I don't have a magical remedy for this, but I count on the spirits, the creative, the wonderful spirits of people like the ones present here today, and of young leaders like Mahua, to find that remedy for the sake of our country.
Thank you, sir. You know, this, from the personal recollection chapter, you go on to the 4th chapter, where again you're very assertive. Like you started the first chapter with, yes, there is Ram. Early on in chapter 4, you say Gandhi is safe. In spite of all of this, all we've discussed so far would make perhaps all of us feel that Gandhi is in danger. Gandhian ideals are in danger. The world that he imagined is in danger. But you, in spite of everything, go on to start off with saying Gandhi is safe. So you very quickly assert that he's not in danger. And Sarojini Naidu, after Gandhi's death, said, do not rest. Do not allow us to rest. Keep us to our pledge. Now, this eternal vigilance is a price that we know that we all pay for democracy. And many of us today feel that this is ebbing. We're not on our guard. We're not vigilant. It is ebbing. But yet you seem to feel very strongly that Gandhi is safe. Where does this confidence come from?
Well, the fact that Gandhi is safe comes from my knowledge that he is no longer living.
So he's safe in his grave is a very safe place to be. Yeah.
So, Gandhi is safe. उसको आप गाली दे सकते हैं, गोली मार सकते हैं, उसको कुछ नहीं होने वाला है. But where I now disagree with Sarojini Naidu, who says, of course, shortly after Gandhi's assassination, do not rest, do not allow us to rest. You know, amazing thing about Gandhi and many people in India, we blamed him for not solving all the problems of his time. We also blame him for not solving all the problems of our time.
Yeah, it's true.
इसमें कुछ ज़्यादती है. I mean, after all, he was a human being. Some problems were left for us to resolve. So that is where I feel that the focus has to be not on what Gandhi's mistakes were. Let us assume that he made 1,000 mistakes, 10,000 mistakes. Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, let's assume that they made millions of mistakes. But what about the ideals that they believed in? Is India for everyone? Does everyone have equal rights in India? and as Mahua said earlier, not just India की आज़ादी, लेकिन हर एक हिंदुस्तानी की आज़ादी.
And insaf.
और इंसाफ, बोलने की आज़ादी, सोचने की आज़ादी, नारा नहीं चिल्लाने की आज़ादी. अगर कोई जबरदस्ती मुझे आकर कहता है कि ये कहो, वो कहो, मेरा दिल कहेगा तो मैं जरूर कहूंगा, लेकिन आपकी जबरदस्ती से मैं नहीं कहूंगा. सो दीज आई, इफ यू मेक एन, गांधी को गाली दो, गांधी इज सेफ, उसे कुछ नहीं होने वाला है. लेकिन अगर आप इक्वालिटी को, दोस्ती को, म्यूचुअल रिस्पेक्ट को, आदर को, सम्मान को चोट पहुंचाते हैं, तो मैं आपका दुश्मन हूं.
It's a very, very sort of short and succinct description of why he's safe. And you brought out a few comments that Gandhi made, and you quote Gandhi and you said they maintain that all Muslims are sinister and all Hindus are angels. I cannot accept this.
These are Gandhi's words.
These are Gandhi's words.
Not
You've quoted
Gandhi's words.
No,
Gandhi's
when
words.
I talk about Gandhi, I mean Gandhi. When he says, and he's talked about when people were talking about Pakistan, he says, go and fight in Pakistan, but end cowardly reprisals on Muslims in India. Because Muslims in India are your people, they're Indians. Don't look at them as Muslims, look at them as Indians. Go and fight in Pakistan if you have to. And then you quote this passage, and this is wonderful and everyone should hear this. He says, Gandhi warned of future attempts at rewriting history and obliterating the Muslim period. So Gandhi says that there could be a time, and he's prophesizing, and he says there could be a time where we forget that there was a Jama Masjid in Delhi. We forget that there's a Muslim university in Aligarh, or there's a Taj Mahal in Agra. Right? And so what are your views on this? Do you feel Gandhi's, powers of prophecy were greater than anything else? Did he foresee this? Because sitting here today and we're actually seeing this, we're coming and people are, Sardar Patel sat in number 1 Aurangzeb Road, and I'm sure the thought never struck him. Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya, great scholar of Ram, never talked about forcibly breaking down a mosque. So today, do you feel this? Do you feel,
yeah.
How did he get it so right?
Yes, I think this is indeed remarkable, that in November 1947, 2 months before he was killed, Gandhi writes an article. It's not just a remark in conversation to a visitor, not even a remark in his post-prayer speech. He writes an article in his journal Harijan, where he mentions this possibility that there may come a time, because he has seen this current of hatred in Nafrat ki Leher. Of course, the amazing thing is that partly because of the assassination, which had the opposite effect of what was intended, and also because of Nehru and Patel and Ambedkar and many others, perhaps many relatives of all of you present here, a great many Indians decided that whatever the horrors of partition, India will be a nation for everyone. It was a fantastic thing for the world. I mean, imagine, with all the terrible killings, newly liberated India says to the whole world, we will try to create a society of equality, mutual respect, protection of everybody. It was an amazing decision of the Indian people. And today, we know what is happening. Many sad things are happening. Terrible things are happening. And you know the saddest of all things is the silence about cruelty from the top. That is the saddest thing. Now, silence is a wonderful virtue. Meditation, silence, reflection, introspection. But if you are the leader of a nation, or you are a person with an influential platform, and people listen to you, and they respect you, and they take their line, their thinking from you, should you not say something when something really cruel happens? When something callous happens? So that silence about the zabardasti, about the coercion, is one of the most painful things that all of us have to endure.
I think silence makes us all part of the problem. It's, when we keep quiet about important things, I think we're all perpetrators. We're all collective perpetrators. We've got about 10 minutes left, but I will take 2 minutes and talk about the final chapter in the book. And he says, where do we go from here? And there are two things that you talk about here. And, obviously, the first point is if democracy dies in India, it's not that it just dies within the geographic boundaries of India, but in the other 5/6 of the globe, the repercussions are huge. And we talk about zabardasti. And today, this zabardasti, this coercion, is everywhere. And you quote Gandhi saying that Gandhi refused to accept any form of zabardasti, even when someone asked someone to say Jai Hind during the freedom struggle and forced him, Gandhi said no. Right after independence, some very enthusiastic youngsters in Calcutta were running around and they saw some British people and wanted them to say Jai Hind. Gandhi objected to even that. Now imagine, he said that coercion is a nail in democracy, is driving a nail into democracy if you're cursing. Now today when you're living in a world where everything is being coerced, where they even tell you how you should pick up the phone and answer, where everything is about not only Jai Hind, it's about Jai Shri Ram or Bharat Mata Ki Jai or all of these things that we're not saying that we don't believe in it or that you don't want to say it, but it is something that Gandhi understood intrinsically that has to come from within. So this is this age of zabardasti that you talk about, this age of coercion. And then you go on to say that if democracy is to be revived, it will not happen in Delhi. It is going to happen in small circles around all of us, in tea shops, in family groups, in discussion circles. And this is something that I face a lot because being a public representative, everyone seems to have the right to come and say, oh, what are you doing? What are you guys doing about it? How are you stopping the right? How are you stopping this? And my answer is always this, that the onus is on all of us. It's incumbent upon all of us. If you are part of a family group where you've got some rabid uncle who you can't even shut up, then how do you think that, 200 of